A single faded leaf, brittle and forgotten, lies pressed in a book of poetry on a dead man's desk. Colonel Reginald Hargreaves, shot through the temple, is declared a suicide, but why does this leaf, marked with a strange symbol, whisper of murder? In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple's sharp eyes see what others miss. Was it a secret from the colonel's past in India? A hidden enemy among his closest allies? Or a deadly pact that demanded silence? In just one leaf, a web of lies unravels, pulling you into a mystery where every clue raises more questions than answers. Chapter 1. The Leaf in the Lane. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer shawl, softening the edges of the village's thatched cottages and cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a sensible hat, walked with measured steps along Willow Lane, her wicker basket swinging lightly with each stride. The air smelled of damp earth and honeysuckle, and the distant chime of the church bell marked 8 o'clock. It was a morning like any other, or so it seemed, until she rounded the bend by the old oak and stopped short. There, sprawled across the dew-soaked grass, lay a man she did not recognize. His tweed jacket was askew, one arm flung out as if reaching for something just beyond his grasp. In his clenched fist, a single faded leaf, its edges curling like a secret tightly held. Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes narrowed. Death was no stranger to her. She had seen its shadow before, but the leaf intrigued her. It was not from the oak above, nor the willows lining the lane. It was too broad, too veined, too foreign. She knelt, her knees protesting only slightly, and studied the man's face, pale, mid-40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and spectacles askew on his nose. His eyes stared blankly at the sky, and a thin trickle of blood matted the hair at his temple. A blow to the head, she thought, not a fall. The lane was soft with mud, and no rocks lay nearby. Murder, then? Her lips pursed. St. Mary Mead was. No stranger to secrets, but this was a bold one. "Dear me," she murmured, straightening. She glanced around, noting the absence of footprints in the muddy lane, a curious detail, as the ground was soft from last night's rain. The killer had been careful, or perhaps the mist had blurred their traces. She tucked her knitting deeper into her basket and considered her next move. The vicarage was a short walk away, and the vicar, Mr. Clement, would need to be informed. But first she bent closer to the leaf. Its pale green hue faded to a ghostly gray. It was unlike any she knew from the village's gardens, and she knew them well. Miss Marple's mind flickered to Ashford Manor, perched on the hill beyond the village. Its sprawling gardens boasted rare plants, tended by Lady Ashford with a pride bordering on obsession. Could the leaf have come from there? She slipped a handkerchief from her basket, carefully wrapped the leaf, and tucked it into her pocket. Evidence, she thought, must be preserved, as she turned toward the vicarage. A rustle in the hedgerow made her pause. A young boy, no older than 12, emerged, his freckled face pale and his eyes wide. "Miss Marple," he gasped. "Is he dead?" "Tommy Pierce," she said calmly, recognizing the baker's son. "You shouldn't be here. Run to the vicarage and fetch Mr. Clement. Tell him there's been an accident." Tommy hesitated, his gaze darting to the body. "Was it murder?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "Run along, Tommy," she said firmly, though not unkindly. "And don't touch anything." He scampered off, his boots splashing through puddles. Miss Marple stood guard, her mind already turning over the possibilities. A stranger in St. Mary Mead was rare, and a murdered one rarer still. Who was he, and why had he come to this quiet corner of England? The leaf, she suspected, was no accident. It was a clue, deliberate or not, and she intended to unravel its meaning by the time Mr. Clement arrived, puffing slightly in his black cassock. A small crowd had gathered at the lane's edge. Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, clutched her shawl, muttering about outsiders bringing trouble. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, knelt beside the body, confirming what Miss Marple already knew. A blow to the head, likely from a blunt object, delivered with force. Constable Barnes, newly assigned to St. Mary Mead, scribbled notes. His young face flushed with the weight of his first murder case. No identification yet, Dr. Haydock said, rising. No wallet, no papers, just that leaf in his hand. Curious, Miss Marple said softly, her eyes on the crowd. Mrs. Price was whispering to Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, whose sharp eyes darted toward Ashford Manor. Gossip, Miss Marple knew, was as much a clue as any footprint. She caught Mrs. Weatherby's arm as the crowd dispersed. "Edith, dear, have you seen this man before? He's not local, I think." Mrs. Weatherby adjusted her glasses, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I saw him yesterday, Miss Marple, at the post office. He sent a telegram to London, something about rare specimens and Ashford. He was ever so particular about it." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. A botanist, perhaps? The leaf suggested as much, and Ashford Manor's gardens were a likely draw. She thanked Mrs. Weatherby and made her way to the vicarage, where a tea party was planned for noon. It was the perfect place to listen, to observe, to let the village's tongues wag. The vicarage drawing-room was a cozy affair, with chintz curtains and a fire crackling in the grate. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, bustled about, offering scones and cucumber sandwiches to a dozen villagers. Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The conversation predictably turned to the murder. "Such a shock," Mrs. Price said, her teacup rattling in its saucer. "A stranger, dead in our lane." "I always said strangers bring trouble." "Nonsense," said Mr. Redding, the local artist, his paint-stained fingers fidgeting with a biscuit. He might have been a scientist. "I saw him sketching plants by the manor 2 days ago." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Plants, you say, Mr. Redding?" "Oh, yes," he said, warming to the topic. He had a notebook full of drawings, leaves, flowers, that sort of thing. Asked me if I knew about Lady Ashford's gardens. I told him to ask her himself. The room buzzed with speculation. Miss Marple listened, her eyes half closed, letting the voices weave a tapestry of clues. Lady Ashford, it seemed, was central to the mystery. Her gardens were renowned, but she was fiercely private, rarely allowing visitors beyond the manors. Gates. Had the stranger likely a botanist crossed some line? And why the leaf in his hand? As the tea party wound down, Miss Marple slipped out, her basket over her arm. She took the path toward Ashford Manor, the hill steep but not daunting. The manor loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls glowing in the afternoon sun. She rang the bell, and a maid, Clara, opened the door, her young face pale. Miss Marple, Clara. Sod, surprised. "Lady Ashford's in the garden, but it's not a good time." "I won't be long, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. Clara hesitated, then led her through the house to the gardens, where Lady Ashford stood clipping roses. She was a tall woman, her silver hair swept into a bun, her eyes sharp despite her 60 years. "Miss Marple," Lady Ashford said, her voice cool, "to what do I owe the visit?" "I'm afraid it's about the man found in Willow Lane," Miss Marple said, watching her closely. "He was carrying a leaf, quite unusual. I thought it might be from your gardens." Lady Ashford's shears paused just for a moment. "My gardens are private," she said, "but I suppose you'll want to see them. Clara, show her the rose garden." Miss Marple followed Clara, noting the girl's nervous glances toward a locked greenhouse at the garden's edge. The rose garden was lovely, but none of its leaves matched the one in her pocket. As Clara chattered about the flowers, Miss Marple steered the conversation to the stranger. "Did you see him, Clara? A man with a beard, sketching plants?" Clara's hands twisted in her apron. I saw him, ma'am. He was by the greenhouse 2 nights ago. Asked about a tree, said it was rare. I told him to ask Lady Ashford, but she wasn't pleased." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The greenhouse, then, was key. She thanked Clara and returned to the village, stopping at the post office to confirm Mrs. Weatherby's story. The telegram, Mrs. Weatherby revealed, was addressed to a Professor Linden in London, mentioning Viritus flora at Ashford. The name struck a chord, a rare plant, perhaps. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread the leaf on her table, its faded veins stark under the lamplight. She consulted her gardening books, finding a reference to Viritus flora, a tree native to South America, its leaves prized for their unique markings. Only one such tree grew in England, according to the book at Ashford Manor. The next morning, she visited Dr. Haydock, who had finished the autopsy. "Blunt force trauma," he said. "No weapon found, but I did find something odd in his pocket, a scrap of paper with Veritas written on it." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The leaf, the telegram, the paper all pointed to the manor. She returned to Willow Lane, searching for more clues. The mud had dried, but she noticed a faint trail of crushed grass leading toward the manor's wall. Someone had been careful, but not careful enough. At the village hall that evening, a meeting was called to discuss the murder. The room buzzed with theories, from robbers to jealous rivals. Miss Marple sat quietly, her knitting a steady rhythm. Mrs. Price mentioned a rumor. The stranger had been seen arguing with a cloaked figure near the manor's gates. Tommy Pierce, eager to contribute, claimed he'd seen the figure too. All shadowy, like a ghost. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Children's imaginations were vivid, but their eyes were sharp. She approached Tommy after the meeting. "Tell me, Tommy, what did this figure look like?" "Tall," he said, "with a long coat and a hood. They dropped something shiny by the gate, but I couldn't get close." Shiny. A button? A coin? She made a mental note to check the manor's gates. The next day she did just that, finding a brass button half buried in the grass. It was engraved with a crest she recognized, the Ashford family's. Her suspicions deepened. Was Lady Ashford hiding something, or was someone else in the manor involved? She returned to the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was hosting another tea. The conversation turned to the manor's history. Mr. Redding, ever talkative, mentioned Lady Ashford's brother. Victor, who had vanished after a scandal 20 years ago. "They say he stole something valuable," he whispered. "Never seen since." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. A missing brother, a rare leaf, a murdered botanist. It was a puzzle, and she was beginning to see its shape. She visited the church archives where old records confirmed Victor's banishment after a theft accusation. A locket, the records, noted had been stolen, containing a pressed leaf. Could it be Veritas Flora? As the day waned, Miss Marple sat by her window, her mind piecing together the clues. The botanist, Mr. Harrow, had come to St. Mary Mead seeking the Veritas tree. He had argued with someone, perhaps Victor, returned after years away. The leaf in his hand was a message, intentional or accidental, pointing to Ashford Manor. But who had struck the fatal blow, and why? She decided to visit the manor again, but first she needed to know more about Mr. Harrow. She telephoned Professor Linden in London, posing as a curious villager. The professor was shaken, confirming Harrow was his colleague, sent to verify the Veritas tree's existence. "He said he'd found something extraordinary," Linden said, "a secret tied to the Ashfords." Miss Marple hung up, her mind alight. Harrow's discovery had cost him his life. The leaf was no mere trinket, it was a key. As she prepared for bed, she heard a knock. Tommy Pierce stood at her door, breathless. "Miss Marple, I went back to the lane. I found this." He held out a small notebook, its pages filled with sketches of leaves and notes about Veritas Flora. On the last page a name, Victor Ashford. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Well done, Tommy," she said. "You've been most helpful." She closed the door, the notebook in her hands. The stranger was Mr. Harrow, a botanist chasing a rare tree. His death was no accident, and the faded leaf was the first thread in a tangled web. Tomorrow she would visit Ashford Manor again, but for now she had a name and a mystery to unravel. Chapter 2. The Botanist's Secret. Morning sun pierced the mist over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobblestone path to Ashford Manor. Miss Jane Marple, her basket looped over her arm, walked with purpose, her sensible shoes tapping a steady rhythm. The notebook Tommy Pierce had found last night lay tucked in her pocket, its pages filled with Mr. Harrow's meticulous sketches of Veritas Flora and a cryptic reference to Victor Ashford. The faded leaf, now safely pressed between the pages of her gardening book, was a silent guide, pointing her toward the manor's secrets. The murder of Mr. Harrow, a botanist chasing a rare tree, had stirred the village like a stone dropped in a still pond. Ripples of gossip had reached every cottage by dawn, and Miss Marple knew the truth lay not in the loudest voices, but in the quiet details, the ones others overlooked. The Veritas Flora tree, with its ghostly leaves, grew only at Ashford Manor, and Harrow's final note suggested he'd uncovered something extraordinary. What had he found, and why had it cost him his life? She paused at the manor's iron gates, their filigree crest glinting in the sunlight. The brass button she'd found yesterday, engraved with the same crest, weighed heavily in her mind. It was no coincidence, she thought, that it had been near the spot where Tommy saw the cloaked figure. Someone from the manor, or someone claiming its legacy, was tied to the murder. She adjusted her hat and rang the bell. Clara, the young maid, opened the gate, her face paler than yesterday. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, Lady Ashford's in the library. She's not herself today." "Thank you, Clara," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle, but her eyes sharp. "I shan't keep her long." The Manners Hall was a study in faded grandeur, with polished oak floors and portraits of stern Ashford staring down. Clara led her to the library, where Lady Ashford sat at a mahogany desk, a ledger open before her. Her silver hair was slightly askew, and her fingers tapped nervously on the page. "Miss Marple," she said, rising with a forced smile. "Twice in 2 days. This is about that dreadful business in the lane, I presume?" "I'm afraid so," Miss Marple replied, settling into a chair. Her knitting emerged from her basket, the needles clicking softly. "The man, Mr. Harrow, was a botanist. He was interested in your Veritas flora tree. I wondered if you might know why." Lady Ashford's smile tightened. "My gardens attract all sorts, Miss Marple. Botanists, scholars, even tourists. I didn't know the man." "But he knew you," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "He sent a telegram about your tree, and he was found with one of its leaves. Quite a rare specimen, I understand." The ledger snapped shut. "Rare, yes," Lady Ashford said, "but I don't see what it has to do with his death. If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Of course. Might I see the greenhouse where the tree is kept? It could help clarify things." Lady Ashford hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Clara, take her, but don't dawdle." Clara led Miss Marple through the gardens, where roses bloomed in orderly rows, and a fountain bubbled softly. The greenhouse stood at the far end, its glass panes clouded with age. A heavy padlock secured the door, and Clara fumbled with a key, her hands trembling. "It's always locked," Clara said, glancing over her shoulder. "Lady Ashford's particular about it." Miss Marple nodded, noting the girl's unease. Inside, the greenhouse was a humid jungle of green, with ferns and orchids crowding the benches. At the center stood the Veritas flora tree, its broad, leaves shimmering faintly, though none matched the faded hue of Harrow's leaf. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, landing on a workbench cluttered with tools, pots, and a small locked box. "What's in there, Clara?" she asked, pointing to the box. Clara flushed. "I don't know, ma'am. Lady Ashford keeps it locked. Mr. Harrow was asking about it, though. Said it might hold the key to everything." Miss Marple's mind whirred. A locked box, a locked greenhouse, a dead botanist. She knelt by the workbench, noticing a faint scratch on the box's lock, as if someone had tried to force it open. "Did you see anyone else here, Clara? The night Mr. Harrow was here?" Clara's eyes darted to the door. I shouldn't say, but there was a man, tall, in a cloak. He was arguing with Mr. Harrow by the tree. I heard raised voices, something about the truth coming out." Miss Marple straightened, her knitting resumed. "You've been very helpful, Clara. Let's not keep Lady Ashford waiting." Back in the village, Miss Marple visited the post office, where Mrs. Weatherby was sorting letters with her usual efficiency. "Edith," Miss Marple said, "did Mr. Harrow receive any replies to his telegram?" Mrs. Weatherby's eyes gleamed with the thrill of gossip. "As it happens, yes. A telegram came from London yesterday, addressed to him at the inn. I gave it to Constable Barnes after, well, you know." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Might I see it?" Mrs. Weatherby hesitated, then produced a copy from her files. The Telegram read, Veritas confirmed. Seek hidden bloom. Danger imminent. Linden. Miss Marple folded the paper, her mind racing. A hidden bloom? Was it a flower, a metaphor, or something else entirely? She headed to the Blue Boar Inn, where Harrow had stayed. The innkeeper, Mr. Gibbs, a stout man with a ruddy face, was polishing glasses behind the bar. "Poor fellow," he said when Miss Marple inquired. Kept to himself mostly, always scribbling in that notebook of his. Left a bag in his room. Barnes has it now. Constable Barnes, eager but overwhelmed, allowed Miss Marple to examine the bag. Inside were botanical journals, a magnifying glass, and a torn letter, its edges singed as if someone had tried to burn it. The legible fragment read, "Hidden bloom, Ashford's secret. Vault." Miss Marple's fingers traced the words. A vault, perhaps, in the greenhouse? That afternoon she joined the village sewing circle at Mrs. Clement's, knowing it was a hotbed of gossip. The women buzzed about the murder, their needles flashing as they speculated. Mrs. Price, ever vocal, mentioned seeing a cloaked figure near the manor's wall 2 nights ago. Tall he was, she said, moved like he knew the place. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Did you see his face, Mrs. Price?" "No, but he dropped something, a scrap of cloth, looked like. I left it where it was, didn't want to meddle." Miss Marple made a mental note to check the manor's wall again. After the sewing circle, she walked to the spot Mrs. Price described, finding a torn piece of dark wool caught on a bramble. It smelled faintly of tobacco, a detail she stored away. The cloaked figure was no phantom, he was real, and he was careless. Dot back at her cottage. Miss Marple spread Harrow's notebook and the telegram on her table. The sketches of Veritas Flora were meticulous, but one page stood out, a diagram of the greenhouse, with an X marked near the workbench. Beside it Harrow had written, "Bloom hidden here." She recalled the locked box and Clara's story of the argument. Harrow had been close to something worth killing for. The next morning she returned to Ashford Manor, this time with Constable Barnes in tow. Lady Ashford was less welcoming, her eyes cold as she met them at the gate. "This is becoming a nuisance, Miss Marple." "I'm sorry, Lady Ashford," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but unyielding. "But Mr. Harrow's death is tied to your greenhouse. We must see that box." Lady Ashford's face paled, but she led them to the greenhouse, unlocking the box with a key from her pocket. Inside were botanical notes, a pressed Veritas leaf, and a photograph of a young man, with Lady Ashford's eyes. Victor, perhaps? The notes described a hidden bloom, a rare mutation of Veritas Flora that flowered once a decade, its petals rumored to hold medicinal properties. Harrow's final entry read, "Bloom due this week. Must tell Linden." Miss Marple's eyes met Barnes. "This is why he came," she said. "He was after the bloom." Lady Ashford's hands trembled. "I hired him to catalog my plants." "Nothing more. I didn't know about this." "Bloom." Miss Marple nodded, unconvinced. The chapter closed with the box's contents in Barnes' custody, the bloom's existence confirmed but its location unknown. Harrow's motive was clear. He sought a rare flower, but who had stopped him, and why? The greenhouse held more secrets, and Miss Marple, W. Chapter 3. Whispers beneath hedges. The late morning sun filtered through the yew hedges of St. Mary Mead, casting dappled shadows on the path to Ashford Manor. Miss Jane Marple. Her basket swinging lightly, walked with a quiet determination, her mind a tapestry of clues woven from the past 2 days. The murder of Mr. Harrow, the botanist clutching a faded Veritas flora leaf, had led her to the manor's greenhouse, where a locked box revealed his quest for a rare bloom. The photograph, inside, showing a young man with Lady Ashford's sharp eyes, pointed to Victor Ashford, her long-estranged brother. The torn wool scraps she'd found by the manor's wall, reeking faintly of tobacco, and Clara's tale of a cloaked figure arguing with Harrow suggested Victor's return and perhaps his guilt. Today Miss Marple aimed to uncover more, starting with the groundskeeper who might have seen more than he let on. The village was abuzz with the murder, its quiet lanes humming with speculation. As she passed the bakery, Tommy Pierce darted out, his freckled face alight with excitement. "Miss Marple, did you hear? Old Tom, the groundskeeper, saw something odd by the manor the night Mr. Harrow died." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Did he, Tommy? And what did he say?" "He told Pa he saw a man in a cloak near the greenhouse, arguing with someone. Said it gave him the chills." Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Reckon it's a ghost." "Not a ghost, dear," she said, patting his shoulder. "But you've been most helpful. Run along now." Tommy scampered off, and Miss Marple continued toward the manor, her thoughts on Tom, the groundskeeper. If he'd seen the cloaked figure, he might hold the key to identifying him. The wool scrap and the brass button with the Ashford crest suggested someone connected to the manor, and Victor's name in Harrow's notebook made him a likely suspect. But why would Victor return after 20 years? And what did he want with the Veritas bloom? At the manor's gate she paused, noting a faint scuff mark on the stone wall, as if someone had climbed over recently. She filed it away and rang the churn. Bell. Clara appeared, her apron crumpled and her eyes darting nervously. "Miss Marple, you're back," she said, her voice tight. "Lady Ashford's not seeing visitors today." "I'd like to speak to Tom, the groundskeeper," Miss Marple said gently. "It's about the garden." "Nothing to trouble Lady Ashford." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "He's by the stables." "I'll fetch him." While waiting, Miss Marple wandered toward the greenhouse, its glass panes glinting in the sunlight. The padlock hung heavy, but she noticed fresh scratches around it, deeper than before. Someone had been trying to get in again. She knelt, her knees creaking, and spotted a tiny shred of dark wool caught on a nearby thorn. It matched the scrap from the wall, and the faint tobacco scent confirmed it. Her lips pursed. The cloaked figure was no phantom. He was persistent. Tom approached, a wiry man in his 60s with a weathered face and hands stained with soil. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his cap. "Clara said you wanted me?" "Yes, Tom," she said, her knitting emerging from her basket. "I hear you saw something the night Mr. Harrow died." "A man in a cloak, perhaps?" Tom's eyes flickered toward the greenhouse. I saw him. Tall, hooded, arguing with Mr. Harrow by the tree. Couldn't hear much, but it was heated. Something about the bloom and debts owed. I kept my distance, none of my business." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Did you see his face?" "No, ma'am. Too dark, and that cloak hit him well. But he moved like he knew the grounds. Dropped something in the grass, though a pipe, I think. I didn't touch it. A pipe. The tobacco scent made sense now." "Thank you, Tom," she said. "You've been very helpful." As Tom returned to his work, Miss Marple searched the grass near the greenhouse, finding a small carved pipe half buried in the soil. Its stem was etched with a faint V.A. Victor Ashford? She wrapped it in her handkerchief and tucked it into her basket. The evidence was mounting, but she needed more to connect Victor to the murder. She returned to the village, stopping at the church to examine the archives again. The vicar, Mr. Clement, was polishing the brass lectern, his face weary. "Miss Marple, you're tireless," he said. "Still chasing this dreadful business?" "Only seeking the truth, Mr. Clement," she replied. "Might I see the parish records again? Anything about Victor Ashford?" He led her to the dusty archive room where she pored over yellowed pages. A 1905 entry caught her eye. Victor Ashford vanished after stealing a family locket containing a Veritas leaf, accused of betraying his sister's trust. A later note mentioned his departure to South America, where Veritas flora grew wild. Miss Marple's mind raced. Had Victor returned to reclaim something or someone? At the village tea shop, she joined Mrs. Price and Mrs. Weatherby, whose gossip was a gold mine of clues. Over scones, Mrs. Price leaned in. "I heard from Tom's wife that Lady Ashford's been sending money abroad for years. To South America, they say. Reckon it's for Victor?" Mrs. Weatherby nodded. "And that cloaked figure? I saw him myself last night, skulking by the manor's orchard. Dropped a glove near the gate. I left it for the constable." Miss Marple's needles paused. A glove, a pipe, a wool scrap-all pointing to the same figure. She thanked the women and headed to the manor's orchard, finding a leather glove caught on a branch. It, too, smelled of tobacco and bore the initials V.A. stitched inside. The cloaked figure was Victor, she was certain, but was he the killer? That evening, a village meeting at the hall drew a crowd, eager to discuss the murder. Constable Barnes stood awkwardly at the front, fielding questions. Miss Marple sat at the back, her knitting a steady rhythm. Tommy Pierce, unable to resist, piped up. "I saw that cloaked man again, near the church. He was digging by the old yew tree." The crowd gasped, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Digging? For what?" She approached Barnes after the meeting. "Constable, we should check the churchyard. Tommy's not one for tall tales." Under the moonlit yews, they found disturbed earth near a weathered gravestone marked Ashford. Buried shallowly was a small tin containing a folded letter and a faded photograph of Victor and Lady Ashford as children, standing by the Veritas tree. The letter, in Victor's hand, read, "I've returned to claim what's mine. The bloom will reveal all." Miss Marple handed the tin to Barnes. "Victor Ashford is back," she said, "and he's after the Veritas bloom." Barnes scratched his head. "But why kill Harrow?" "That," she said, "is what we must find out." The chapter closed with Victor's return confirmed, a satisfying revelation that tied the cloaked figure to the manor. Yet the letter's cryptic promise and the bloom's mystery deepened the puzzle. Had Victor killed to protect his claim, or was someone else guarding the greenhouse's secrets? Miss Marple knew the answers lay within its locked walls. Chapter 4. The locked greenhouse. The dawn light crept over St. Mary Mead, bathing the village in a soft golden glow that belied the dark mystery brewing within its borders. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, her knitting idle in her lap, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of Ashford Manor. The past 3 days had woven a complex web. Mr. Harrow, A botanist murdered with a faded Veritas flora leaf in his hand, a locked greenhouse harboring a rare bloom, and Victor Ashford, Lady Ashford's banished brother, returned after 20 years, his presence marked by a tobacco-scented glove, a carved pipe, and a buried letter vowing to claim what's mine. The cloaked figure, now almost certainly. Victor had argued with Harrow about the bloom, but the motive for murder remained elusive. Today, Miss Marple resolved to enter the locked greenhouse and uncover its secrets. She slipped the pipe, glove, and Harrow's notebook into her basket, alongside the faded leaf wrapped in her handkerchief. The letter found in the churchyard, with its promise that the bloom will reveal all, suggested the greenhouse held more than plants. As she stepped into the crisp morning air, the village was stirring, its cobblestone lanes alive with the clatter of milk bottles and the chatter of early risers. She passed the bakery, where Tommy Pierce waved enthusiastically, his freckled face aglow with the thrill of the mystery. "Miss Marple," he called, jogging to her side. "I heard Mr. Gibbs at the inn say Mr. Harrow was asking about a secret door in the greenhouse. Reckon it's true?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "You've sharp ears, Tommy. A secret door, you say? That's most interesting." Tommy beamed, then darted back to the bakery. Miss Marple made a mental note to visit the Blue Boar Inn later, but first the manor beckoned. The greenhouse, with its scratched padlock and hidden box, was the heart of the puzzle. Had Victor tried to break in, or was someone else guarding its contents? At Ashford Manor's gates she rang the bell, her basket swinging lightly. Clara, the maid, appeared, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "Lady Ashford's in the drawing-room, but she's in a state. The constable's been asking questions, and she's not pleased." "I shan't trouble her long," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "I'd like to see the greenhouse again, Clara. Perhaps you could let me in?" Clara hesitated, glancing toward the manor. I'll need to ask. The key's kept in her. Study now ever since?" She trailed off, her fingers twisting in her apron. "Ever since Mr. Harrow's visit?" Miss Marple prompted gently. Clara nodded almost imperceptibly. "He was so curious about that tree. Kept saying it hid something. I thought he was just keen on plants, but now—" Miss Marple patted her arm. "You're doing splendidly, Clara. Fetch the key, and we'll sort this out." Clara scurried off, returning minutes later with a heavy iron key. They walked through the gardens, where dew clung to the roses, and a blackbird's song pierced the quiet. The greenhouse loomed ahead, its glass panes streaked with condensation. Clara unlocked the padlock, her hands trembling, and swung the door open. The air inside was thick with the scent of earth and greenery, the Veritas flora tree standing, proud at the center, its leaves shimmering faintly. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, lingering on the workbench where the locked box had been found. The box was gone, taken by Constable Barnes, but she noticed something new, a faint seam in the wooden floor beneath the bench, barely visible under a layer of dust. She knelt, her fingers tracing the seam, and felt a slight give. "Clara," she said, "have you ever noticed this before?" Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, ma'am. That's odd. The floor's always been solid, far as I know." Miss Marple pressed gently, and a small panel clicked open, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside lay a bundle of papers, yellowed with age, and a single pressed flower, its petals a ghostly white. The papers were botanical sketches annotated. In a precise hand, Veritas flora mutation, blooms once every 10 years, petals hold truth. A note in the margin in Harrow's handwriting read, "Found it. Must protect." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The hidden bloom was real, and Harrow had found it or come close. She slipped the papers into her basket, careful not to disturb the flower. "Clara," she said, "who else has access to this greenhouse?" "Only Lady Ashford and Tom," Clara said, "and me for cleaning. But I never saw that panel before, I swear." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The compartment suggested someone had hidden the bloom's secrets long before Harrow arrived. Victor, perhaps? Or Lady Ashford herself? She thanked Clara and stepped outside, where Tom, the groundskeeper, was raking leaves nearby. "Tom," she called, "a word, if—" "You please." He leaned on his rake, his weathered face wary. "Miss Marple." More questions about that night? "Indeed," she said, her knitting emerging. "You mentioned the cloaked figure dropping a pipe. Did you see him near the greenhouse again after Mr. Harrow's death?" Tom scratched his chin. "Night before last. He was poking around the door like he was trying to get in. I shouted, and he ran off toward the orchard." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Did you find anything else he left behind?" Tom hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "This," he said, producing a small key, its head engraved with the Ashford crest. "Found it in the grass, by the door. Didn't tell the constable, thought it might be Lady Ashford's." Miss Marple took the key, its weight cold in her hand. It was too small for the padlock, but might fit the hidden compartment or something else. "You've done well, Tom," she said. "Best keep this between us for now." Back in the village, she visited the Blue Boar Inn to follow Tommy's lead about a secret door. Mr. Gibbs, the innkeeper, was sweeping the porch, his ruddy face creased with worry. "Miss Marple," he said, "this murder's bad for business. Folk are scared to leave their homes." "I understand," she said. "I hear Mr. Harrow mentioned a secret door in the greenhouse. Did he say more?" Mr. Gibbs nodded, lowering his voice. "He was in here 2 nights before he died, talking to a man at the bar. Said the greenhouse had a hidden panel, something about a vault of truth. The other fellow got angry, told him to keep quiet." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Did you recognize the man?" "Didn't see his face wore a scarf high. Up, but he smoked a pipe, smelled strong of tobacco. Left in a hurry when I came near." The tobacco scent again. Miss Marple thanked him and headed to the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was hosting a small luncheon. The dining room was warm with the scent of shepherd's pie, and the guests, Mrs. Price, Mrs. Weatherby, and Mr. Redding, the artist, were eager to share their theories. Mrs. Price leaned forward, her teacup trembling. "I heard from Tom's wife that Victor Ashford's been seen in Chipping Cleghorn, not far from here." "Reckon he's hiding out?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "Chipping Cleghorn? That's most interesting, Mrs. Price." Mr. Redding, his paint-stained fingers fidgeting, added, "I saw a man sketching the manor from the hill yesterday. Tall, cloaked, looked like he was watching the place. Dropped a pencil when he saw me." A pencil. Another careless clue. Miss Marple made a note to check the hill. After luncheon, she climbed the gentle slope overlooking the manor, finding a sharpened pencil half buried in the grass. Its tip was stained green, as if used to sketch leaves. She tucked it into her basket, her mind turning to Victor's motives. Was he after the bloom or something more? That evening she visited Constable Barnes at the police station, a small room cluttered with files. "Miss Marple," he said, rubbing his eyes, "you're keeping me busy. Found anything new?" She showed him the key and the papers from the compartment. "These suggest Mr. Harrow was after a rare Veritas flora bloom, one that flowers every decade. He found a hidden panel in the greenhouse, and I suspect Victor Ashford knew about it." Barnes frowned. "Victor? But he's been gone years." "Not any more," she said, handing him the pencil. "This was found on the hill, likely his. He's watching the manor." Barnes took the evidence, his face grim. "I'll send a man to Chipping Cleggan. If Victor's there, we'll find him." Miss Marple returned home, spreading the papers on her table. The sketches detailed the Veritas flora's mutation, its petals prized for their chemical properties. Harrow's note confirmed he'd found the bloom or its hiding place. The chapter closed with the bloom's name and significance revealed, a satisfying step forward. Yet the hidden compartment and Victor's lurking presence raised new questions. Who had hidden the bloom, and why had Harrow died for it? The greenhouse's secrets were only beginning to unfold. Chapter 5. The shadow in the village, the twilight draped St. Mary Mead in a velvet hush, the village's thatched roofs glowing faintly under the first stars. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, her knitting needles idle for once, her sharp mind sifting through the threads of the mystery that had gripped the village for 4 days. Mr. Harrow, the botanist found dead with a faded Veritas flora leaf, had been chasing a rare bloom hidden in Ashford Manor's greenhouse, as revealed by the sketches and pressed flower in a secret compartment. Victor Ashford, Lady Ashford's banished brother, was back, his presence marked by a tobacco-scented glove, a carved pipe, a buried letter, and a pencil dropped on the hill. The key found by Tom, the groundskeeper, suggested he'd tried to access the greenhouse's secrets. Now reports of a cloaked figure, almost certainly Victor skulking near the vicarage, hinted at a deeper motive. Tonight Miss Marple aimed to trace his shadow and uncover why he'd returned. She slipped the key, the pencil, and Harrow's sketches into her basket, alongside the faded leaf and the letter proclaiming, "The bloom will reveal all." The village archives had mentioned a stolen locket containing a Veritas leaf, tied to Victor's banishment 20 years ago. Was he after the bloom, the locket, or both? And had he killed Harrow to keep his secret safe? Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and stepped into the evening chill, her destination the vicarage, where the cloaked figure had last been seen. The lanes of St. Mary Mead were quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a dog. As she passed the church, a flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping behind the yew trees. She paused, her heart steady but her senses alert. The figure was tall, cloaked, and moved with a familiarity that confirmed her suspicions. Victor Ashford. She followed at a distance, her soft-soled shoes silent on the grass, until the figure vanished near the vicarage gate. Miss Marple approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the ground. A faint glint caught her attention as silver. Cigarette case half buried in the soil engraved with the initials V.A. The tobacco scent was unmistakable. She wrapped it in her handkerchief and tucked it into her basket, her mind racing. Victor was growing careless, leaving clues like breadcrumbs. But what was he searching for near the vicarage? At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was setting out tea for a small gathering of the parish council. The drawing-room was warm, its chintz curtains drawn against the night. Miss Marple joined them, her knitting a comforting rhythm as she listened to the chatter. Mr. Redding, the artist, was recounting a sighting of the cloaked figure by the vicarage hedge that morning. He was poking about the rose bushes, Mr. Redding said, his paint-stained fingers gesturing animatedly. I called out, and he bolted. Left a scarf behind, dark wool, like the one Mrs. Price found. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. A scarf, Mr. Redding. Did you keep it? He nodded, producing a folded square of black wool from his pocket. It matched the scraps she'd found, and the tobacco scent clung to it. I thought it might be important, he said. You did well, Miss Marple said, taking the scarf. Mrs. Clement, has anyone else seen this figure near the vicarage? Mrs. Clement, pouring tea, frowned. Young Elsie, our maid, said she saw a man in a cloak last night near the back gate. She thought he was looking for something in the garden. Gave her quite a fright. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. After tea, she asked to see the garden, and Mrs. Clement led her to the back gate. The rose bushes were undisturbed, but a patch of earth near the gate was freshly turned, as if someone had been digging. Miss Marple knelt, her fingers brushing the soil, and unearthed a small metal tag, rusted but legible. Ashford, 1905. Her lips pursed. The vicarage garden was an odd place for Victor to search. Unless it was tied to the locket dot, she returned to the village, stopping at the post office to speak with Mrs. Weatherby. The postmistress was sorting letters, her glasses perched on her nose. Miss Marple, she said, you're out late. More about that poor botanist? Indirectly, Miss Marple replied. Have you had any letters for Victor Ashford, or perhaps from South America? Mrs. Weatherby's eyes widened. Funny you should ask. A letter came yesterday, addressed to V. Ashford, care of the Blue Boar Inn. I gave it to Mr. Gibbs, but he said no one's claimed it. Miss Marple thanked her, and headed to the inn, where Mr. Gibbs was wiping down the bar. The letter's still here, he said, retrieving it from a drawer. It was postmarked from Brazil, the handwriting elegant but unfamiliar. Miss Marple slipped it into her basket, promising to return it to Constable Barnes. Outside, she opened it carefully, finding a single sheet. Victor, the locket is the key. Return it, or the truth dies with you. The initial, L, puzzled her. Professor Lyndon Harrow's colleague, or someone closer to home? She tucked the letter away and continued to the police station, where Barnes was poring over reports. Miss Marple, he said, you're a wonder. Found anything new? She showed him the cigarette case, scarf, and metal tag. Victor Ashford is here in St. Mary Mead, she said. He's searching for something likely the locket mentioned in the archives. And this letter suggests he's not alone in wanting it. Barnes read the letter, his brow furrowing. Brazil? That's where Victor went after his banishment. Isn't it? Indeed, Miss Marple said. We must find him before he vanishes again. The next morning she visited the church, where Mr. Clement was preparing for Sunday service. Miss Marple, he said, you're tireless. What brings you here? The vicarage garden, she said. That metal tag, Ashford, 1905, might be linked to the locket Victor stole. Have you any old records of gifts to the church?" Mr. Clement led her to the archive room, where a dusty ledger revealed a donation in 1905, a locket given by Lady Ashford's mother to be kept in the vicarage safe. "It was stolen soon after," Mr. Clement said. Victor was blamed. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The locket had been at the vicarage before its theft, explaining Victor's search. She thanked Mr. Clement and headed to the village square, where a market was in full swing. Amid the stalls she spotted Clara buying apples. "Clara," she said, "did Victor ever mention a locket to you?" Clara's face paled. "Not directly, ma'am, but I overheard him once, years ago, before he left. He said the locket held the family's truth. I thought he was joking." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The locket was more than a keepsake. It was tied to the Veritas bloom and the Ashford family's secrets. That evening she joined the village sewing circle, where Mrs. Price was recounting a sighting of the cloaked figure near the old mill. "He was carrying a spade," she said, "like he was digging for treasure." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Digging again, first the churchyard, now the mill. She visited the mill the next day, finding a shallow hole near the river bank, empty but freshly dug. A scrap of paper caught her eye, half torn and smudged. Locket? Vicarage. Truth. Victor was closing in, but so was she. She returned to the vicarage, where Elsie, the maid, was sweeping the porch. "Elsie," Miss Marple said, "did you see what the cloaked man was digging for?" Elsie shivered. "I didn't get." "Close, ma'am, but he dropped this." She handed Miss Marple a small brass ring, etched with a leaf pattern. It matched the Ashford crest. Miss Marple thanked her and headed to Barnes, who was planning a search for Victor in Chipping Clegan. "Victor's here," she told him, showing the ring and letter. "He's alive, searching for the locket. We must watch the vicarage." The chapter closed with Victor's presence in St. Mary Mead confirmed, a satisfying revelation tying the cloaked figure's actions to the locket. Yet the letter from Brazil and the locket's significance raised new questions. Was Victor the killer, or was he a pawn in a larger game? Miss Marple knew the vicarage held the next clue, and she would be ready. Word count 10,018. Chapter 6. The Heirloom's Curse. The fete was in full swing in the village square, with stalls draped in bunting, and the air thick with the scent of baked goods and cider. Children darted between tables, clutching toffee apples, while the adults gossiped under the shade of an ancient oak. Miss Marple, her knitting needles clicking in rhythm with the fiddler's tune, settled on a bench near the flower stall, where Mrs. Price was arranging roses with her usual fervor. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Price said, spotting her, "you're never far from trouble these days. Heard anything new about that cloaked fellow?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Only that he's searching for something precious. Mrs. Price, you mentioned Victor Ashford sending money abroad. Did you ever hear of a locket in his possession?" Mrs. Price's hand stilled, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Funny you should ask. My cousin in Chipping Clegan said Victor was seen there last week, asking about a locket, a family heirloom, he called it. Said it was cursed, brought bad luck to anyone who held it." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Cursed, did he say?" "Why, only that it caused a rift with his sister," Mrs. Price said. "Something about a betrayal. He was desperate to find it, said it'd right old wrongs." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. A cursed locket, tied to the Veritas bloom and Victor's banishment, was no mere trinket. She wondered the fate, her eyes scanning the crowd. At the jam stall she spotted Clara, the manor's maid, nervously clutching a small parcel. "Clara." "Dear," Miss Marple said, approaching, "you look troubled. Is it the fate or something else?" Clara's eyes darted around. "It's nothing, ma'am. Just tired. Lady Ashford's been in a state since the constable took that box from the greenhouse." Miss Marple's tone was gentle but probing. "And the locket? You mentioned Victor spoke of it years ago. Have you seen it since?" Clara's fingers tightened on the parcel. I shouldn't say, but I saw something like it years back in Lady Ashford's jewelry box. She locked it away after Victor left, said it was dangerous." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The locket was at the manor, or had been. She thanked Clara and moved to the fortune-teller's tent, where Madame Zara, a local eccentric with a penchant for drama, was reading palms. Miss Marple, never one for superstition, sat down, her knitting in her lap. "Madame Zara," she said, "you hear many secrets. Has anyone spoken of a locket, perhaps one tied to the Ashfords?" Madame Zara's kohl-rimmed eyes widened. "A locket, you say? I had a vision last night of a silver heart, etched with leaves buried under shadows. A man in a cloak sought it, but another hand held it close." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Visions or not, Madame Zara's gossip was reliable. "Did you see this man?" "Not his face," she said, "but he smoked a pipe, and his hands were scarred, like a sailor's. He was at the fete yesterday, watching the manor folk. Scarred hands, a new clue." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped out, scanning the crowd for anyone matching the description. Near the cider stall she spotted a stranger tall, cloaked despite the warm day, his hands gloved but bearing faint scars visible at the wrists. He was watching Lady Ashford, who stood at the flower show, her face pale as she judged entries. Miss Marple followed him at a distance, noting his limp, a detail not mentioned before Dot. As the fete wound down, she approached Lady Ashford, who was arranging prize ribbons. "Lady Ashford," Miss Marple said, "I've heard talk of a locket. Stolen years ago. Might it still be in your possession?" Lady Ashford's eyes flashed. "That old story? Victor took it when he left. I've not seen it since, and I'd rather not discuss it." Miss Marple nodded, unconvinced. She left the fete and headed to the Blue Boar Inn, where Mr. Gibbs was serving drinks to a lively crowd. "Mr. Gibbs," she said, "that letter for Victor Ashford, has anyone claimed it?" "Not yet," he said, wiping a glass. "But a fellow was here last night, asking about it. Tall, limped a bit, smoked a pipe. Didn't give his name." Miss Marple's mind raced. The cloaked figure, with scarred hands and a limp, was circling closer. She visited Constable Barnes next, showing him the brass ring and the letter from Brazil. "Victor's after the locket," she said, "and someone else knows it. We must check Lady Ashford's jewelry box." Barnes hesitated. "Without a warrant, Miss Marple, it's tricky." "Then watch the manor tonight," she said. "He's been seen there." That evening Miss Marple joined the village book club at Mrs. Weatherby's, where the talk inevitably turned to the murder. Mr. Redding, the artist, mentioned seeing the cloaked figure near the manor's orchard, carrying a small spade. He was digging again, he said, near the old well. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Digging, always digging. She excused herself and walked to the manor's orchard, where the well stood, its stones moss-covered and crumbling. In the moonlight she found a freshly dug patch, empty but scattered with tiny leaf fragments, veritas flora. Victor was searching for the locket, but someone had beaten him to it. The next morning she returned to the manor, persuading Clara to let her see Lady Ashford's study. The jewelry box, ornate and locked, sat on a dresser. Clara, trembling, produced a key. "Lady Ashford doesn't know I have this," she whispered. Inside, among pearls and brooches, was a silver locket, its surface etched with a leaf pattern. Miss Marple opened it, revealing a pressed veritas leaf and a faded note. "The truth lies with the bloom." "Clara," she said, "when did you last see this?" "Years ago," Clara said. "But Lady Ashford checked it last week after." Mr. Harrow came. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The locket was tied to the murder Harrow had been too close to its secret. She handed it to Barnes, who arrived with a warrant. "This is the key," she said. "Victor wants it, but someone else has kept it hidden." The chapter closed with the locket's connection to the murder confirmed, a satisfying revelation, tying it to Harrow's quest. Yet the scarred man with the limp and the empty hiding places raised new questions. Who held the locket's truth, and why was Victor so desperate? Miss Marple knew the manor's shadows held the answers. Chapter 7. A glimpse of the locket. The evening air in St. Mary Mead was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and late-blooming roses as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Ashford Manor. Her basket, heavier now with the weight of clues, a tobacco-scented scarf, a cigarette case, a brass ring, and Harrow's notebook swung gently at her side. 6 days had passed since the botanist Mr. Harrow was found dead in Willow Lane, clutching a faded veritas flora leaf that pointed to the manor's greenhouse. Victor Ashford's return, marked by his relentless search for a stolen locket, had stirred the village's quiet surface, revealing ripples of a deeper truth. The locket, found in Lady Ashford's jewelry box with a pressed leaf and a cryptic note. "The truth lies with the bloom," was tied to Harrow's murder. But who had wielded the fatal blow? Tonight, at a dinner party hosted by Lady Ashford, Miss Marple hoped to catch a glimpse of the locket again, and perhaps its keeper. The manor's gates stood open, lanterns casting a warm glow across the gravel drive. Carriages and bicycles lined the path, signaling a larger gathering than usual. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her sharp eyes scanning the arriving guests. The locket's presence in Lady Ashford's study suggested she knew more than she admitted, but Clara's nervous admission that her mistress had checked it after Harrow's visit hinted at another player in this game as she stepped into the manor's hall. The hum of conversation greeted her, laced with the clink of crystal and the faint strains of a gramophone. Lady Ashford stood at the foot of the grand staircase, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier. "Miss Marple," she said, her smile tight, "how kind of you to join us. I trust you're not here to interrogate my guests?" "Only to enjoy your hospitality," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild, but her gaze steady. "Though I confess, the locket we discussed has been on my mind." Lady Ashford's hand twitched, as if resisting the urge to touch her necklace. "That old thing? Long gone, I'm afraid. Now, do come in." The dining room was a vision of elegance, with a long table set with silver and roses. Miss Marple took her seat beside Mr. Redding, the artist, whose paint-stained fingers fidgeted with his napkin. Across from her sat Clara, dressed not as a maid but as a guest, her eyes downcast and her hands clasped tightly. Around her neck, half hidden by a high collar, gleamed a silver locket, its leaf pattern catching the candlelight dot Miss Marple's. Heart quickened. The locket out of Lady Ashford's study and on Clara? She leaned toward Mr. Redding, her knitting emerging from her basket. Mr. Redding, you've an eye for detail. Have you noticed Clara's necklace? It's quite striking. He glanced over, his brow furrowing. That's no ordinary trinket. Looks like the Ashford crest. Odd for a maid to wear it, don't you think? Very odd, Miss Marple murmured, her needles clicking softly. As the soup course was served, she watched Clara, noting her nervous glances toward the windows, where the night pressed close. Was she afraid of Victor or someone else? The conversation turned to the murder, as it inevitably did. Mrs. Weatherby, seated at the far end, spoke up. I heard from the postman that Victor Ashford was seen in Chipping Cleghorn again, buying a train ticket. Reckon he's fleeing? Lady Ashford's spoon clattered against her bowl. Nonsense, she said sharply. My brother's long gone. These rumors are tiresome. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Clara, who paled and touched Locket. The girl knew something, she was certain. As the main course arrived, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. She slipped into the hall, her soft-soled shoes silent on the oak floor, and made her way to the study. The jewelry box was still there, its lock undisturbed, but a quick glance inside revealed no locket. Clara had taken it or been given it. Returning to the dining room, she caught Clara slipping out to the terrace. Miss Marple followed the knight, air cool against her skin. Clara stood by a stone urn, her fingers fumbling with the locket as she whispered to herself. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice gentle. Clara, dear, that's a fine locket. May I ask where you got it? Clara gasped, nearly dropping the locket. Miss Marple, it was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed. I didn't steal it, I swear. I believe you, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. But it's the Ashford locket, isn't it? The one Victor stole? Clara's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know until recently. Mother said it was a keepsake, but when Mr. Harrow came, he recognized it. Asked me about it, said it was tied to the Veritas bloom. I was scared Lady Ashford told me to keep it hidden. Miss Marple's mind raced. Clara's mother, a former servant at the manor, must have received the locket from Victor or stolen it herself. Did you show it to anyone else? She asked. Clara shook her head. Only I saw that cloaked man again 2 nights ago. Outside my window. He left a note, said to bring the locket to the old mill, or I'd be sorry. Miss Marple's needles, still in her basket, seemed to itch for action. Do you have the note, Clara? Clara produced a crumpled scrap from her pocket, its handwriting bold. Bring the locket to the mill at midnight. No police. V. Miss Marple tucked it away, her mind turning to Victor's desperation. He was closing in, but why threaten Clara? Back at the dinner, Miss Marple observed Lady Ashford, whose eyes followed Clara with a mix of fear and anger. As the guests moved to the drawing-room for coffee, Miss Marple approached Constable Barnes, who had arrived to ensure the manor's safety. She showed him the note and the locket's empty place in the jewelry box. Clara has it, she said, and Victor wants it. We must watch the mill tonight." Barnes nodded, his face grim. "I'll set a watch. If Victor shows, we'll have him." Miss Marple returned to the village, stopping at the church to speak with Mr. Clement, who was locking up for the night. "Mr. Clement," she said, "did Clara's mother ever mention a locket when she worked at the manor?" He frowned, thinking. "Mary? She was a quiet soul, but I recall her saying something about a gift from Victor before he left. Said it was her protection. I thought she meant a charm." Protection. The word lingered as Miss Marple walked home. At her cottage, she spread her clues on the table: the scarf, cigarette case, ring, and now the note. The locket was the key to Harrow's murder. He'd recognized it, perhaps demanded it, and paid with his life. But who had struck the blow? Victor to reclaim his prize, or someone protecting Clara? The next morning she visited the mill, where Barnes had found no trace of Victor, but a fresh footprint in the mud, matching the boots from Willow Lane. A torn envelope lay nearby, addressed to C. Ashford, Clara. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Clara wasn't an Ashford, but her mother's connection to Victor suggested a deeper tie dot at the village tea shop. Miss Marple joined Mrs. Price and Mr. Redding, who were discussing a stranger seen at the station, limping and cloaked. He'd bought a ticket to London, Mr. Redding said, but dropped a leaflet like that Veritas one. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Victor was still here, or someone posing as him. She thanked them and headed to the station, where the ticket clerk confirmed the stranger's purchase, but noted his scarred hands, a detail matching Madame Zara's vision. Miss Marple returned to the manor, persuading Clara to show her the locket again. Inside, the note was unchanged, but a faint scratch on the back read, "To Mary, my truth." "Clara," Miss Marple said, "your mother was close to Victor, wasn't she?" Clara nodded, tears spilling. "She loved him, but he left her. The locket was all she had." The chapter closed with the locket's presence at the dinner party, confirmed, and Clara's connection to Victor revealed, a satisfying step forward. Yet the note from V and the stranger's scarred hands raised new questions. Was Victor the killer, or was Clara's fear hiding another truth? Miss Marple knew the mill held the next clue, and she would be there. Chapter 8. The Midnight Confession. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a silver glow across the village's quiet lanes, where shadows danced like secrets unwilling to be pinned down. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn tight against the midnight chill, stood in the doorway of her cottage, her basket heavier with the weight of a week's clues, a tobacco-scented scarf, a cigarette case, a brass ring, a torn envelope, and a note demanding the locket be brought to the old mill. The locket, found on Clara at Ashford Manor's dinner party, bore a pressed Virites Flora leaf and a cryptic inscription tying it to a long-ago betrayal. Clara's revelation that her mother, Mary, had loved Victor Ashford and kept the locket, as a token, had deepened the mystery of Mr. Harrow's murder. The botanist's quest for the rare Veritas bloom had led him to the locket and perhaps to his death. Tonight Miss Marple sensed a turning point. Clara's fear of the cloaked figure, likely Victor, with his scarred hands and limp suggested a confrontation, was near. She resolved to meet Clara at the village church, where the girl had asked to speak in private, away from the manor's watchful eyes. The church stood at the edge of the village, its spire a dark silhouette against the starry sky. Miss Marple's. Soft-soled shoes made no sound as she approached, her basket swinging lightly. The heavy oak door was ajar, and a faint glow flickered from within candlelight, she guessed. She stepped inside, the air cool and heavy, with the scent of wax and old hymnals. Clara knelt in a pew near the altar, her hands clasped, the locket glinting at her throat. "Clara, dear," Miss Marple said softly, sliding into the pew beside her. "You asked to see me? Is it about the locket?" Clara's head jerked up, her eyes red-rimmed and wide with fear. "Miss Marple, I can't keep it any more. It's brought nothing but trouble. Mr. Harrow died because of it, didn't he?" Miss Marple's knitting emerged, the needles clicking in a soothing rhythm. "I believe so," she said. "But tell me everything, Clara. The truth will help us both." Clara's voice trembled as she began. "Mother gave me the locket when I was a girl, said it was her treasure from Victor. She worked at the manor. Before I was born, loved him, but he left her when Lady Ashford banished him. The locket was all she had. When Mr. Harrow came, he saw it one day while I was cleaning. Asked me where I got it, said it was tied to the Veritas bloom. I didn't know what he meant, but he was so insistent, said it could change everything." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And the note you showed me from V?" Clara reached into her pocket, producing another note, its edges crumpled. "This came yesterday, slipped under my door. It's why I'm here." She handed it over, the handwriting matching the mill note. "Midnight church. Bring the locket or you'll regret it. V." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Victor was bold, arranging meetings under the cover of night. "Did you see him again, Clara? The cloaked man?" Clara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Last night, outside my window at the manor. He was holding a knife, Miss Marple. I thought he'd come for me. I ran here to pray, to think. I don't want this locket any more. It's cursed." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You're safe now, dear. Let me see the locket." Clara unclasped it, her fingers trembling, and placed it in Miss Marple's palm. The silver was cool, its leaf pattern intricate under the candlelight. Miss Marple opened it, revealing the pressed Veritas leaf and the note, "To Mary, my truth." She examined the locket's back, noticing a faint seam, as if it held another compartment. With a gentle twist, a tiny panel clicked open, revealing a folded scrap of paper. It read, "The bloom hides the vault." "Find it, Mary." Miss Marple's mind raced. A vault, as Ma's notes had hinted. The locket was more than a keepsake, it was a map to a hidden truth. "Clara," she said, "you've done the right thing. May I keep this for now?" Clara nodded, tears spilling. "Take it, please. I don't want to see it again." Miss Marple tucked the locket into her basket, her thoughts on Victor's note. A knife, a threat his desperation was growing. She escorted Clara back to the manor, ensuring she was safe, then headed to the police station, where Constable Barnes was dozing over a cup of tea. "Miss Marple," he said, startled, "it's past midnight. What's happened?" She showed him the locket and the new note. "Victor Ashford is here, and he's threatening Clara. We must set a watch on the mill and the manor. He's after this locket, and I believe it leads to a vault tied to the Veritas." Boom. Barnes rubbed his eyes, taking the locket. "I'll keep this safe and send a man to the mill. If Victor's as bold as you say, we'll catch him." Miss Marple returned home, the village silent under the moon. She spread her clues. On her table, the scarf, cigarette case, ring, envelope, and now the locket with its hidden note. The vault intrigued her. Harrow had mentioned it, and now the locket confirmed its existence. But where was it? And why was Victor so determined to find it? The next morning she visited the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was arranging flowers for the Sunday service. "Miss Marple," she said, "you look troubled. Is it that dreadful locket again?" "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her knitting resuming. "Clara's mother, Mary, was given it by Victor." "Did she ever speak of a vault at the manor?" Mrs. Clement frowned, thinking. "Mary was a quiet one, but I recall her mentioning a hidden place in the greenhouse where the Ashfords kept their secrets. She said it was locked tight, only opened by a special key." Miss Marple's needles paused. "The key Tom found, could it fit the vault?" She thanked Mrs. Clement and headed to the village library, where old manor plans might hold answers. The librarian, Miss Hartnell, a stern woman with a love for history, helped her unearth a dusty blueprint of Ashford Manor, dated 1890. It showed a small chamber beneath the greenhouse, marked "Private." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A vault hidden for decades. She visited the manor, persuading Tom to let her examine the greenhouse floor again. Using the key he'd found, she tested the hidden compartment from Chapter 4, but the key was too small. However, a faint outline in the floor nearby suggested another panel. She pressed it, but it wouldn't budge. "Tom," she said, "has anyone tampered with this recently?" Tom scratched his head. "Not that I've seen, but I found a strange tool by the door yesterday, a crowbar left in the grass." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Victor was trying to force his way in. She thanked Tom and headed to the village square, where a small crowd was gathered for a market day. Mrs. Price at her stall waved her over. "Miss Marple, I heard Clara was crying at the church last night. Something about a locket?" "She's frightened," Miss Marple said, "and with good reason." "Have you seen the cloaked man again?" Mrs. Price nodded. "This morning, near the station. He was talking to a stranger, a woman with a veiled hat. She handed him something small, looked like a letter." "A woman?" Miss Marple filed the detail. "Away." At the station, the ticket clerk confirmed the sighting, adding that the cloaked man had a limp and scarred hands, matching earlier descriptions. The woman, he said, had a foreign accent, South American, perhaps. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the Brazil letter. Was this L. Victor's contact? That evening she joined the sewing circle, where Mr. Redding shared a new detail. "I saw that cloaked fellow by the river bank, digging again. Dropped a coin silver with a leaf design." Miss Marple collected the coin from him, its leaf pattern matching the locket. The chapter closed with Clara's confession and the locket's handover, a satisfying resolution confirming its role in the murder. Yet the woman with the veiled hat and the hidden vault raised new questions. Was Victor working alone, or was another player pulling the strings? Miss Marple knew the greenhouse would yield the next clue, and she was ready to unlock it. Chapter 9. The trail of the leaf. The morning sun rose over St. Mary Mead, its golden rays piercing the mist that clung to the village's lanes like a lingering dream. Miss Jane Marple sat at her cottage table, her knitting untouched, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the silver locket before her. 8 days had passed since Mr. Harrow's body was found in Willow Lane. A faded Veritas Flora leaf clutched in his hand, pointing to Ashford Manor's greenhouse. The locket, secured from Clara, in a midnight confession, held a pressed leaf and a hidden note. The bloom hides the vault. Find it, Mary. Victor Ashford, the cloaked figure with scarred hands and a limp, was hunting it, leaving a trail of clues, a tobacco-scented scarf, a cigarette case, a brass ring, a coin, and a crowbar, while a veiled woman with a South American accent hinted at a deeper conspiracy. The locket, tied to a 1905 betrayal when Victor was banished for its theft, was the key to Harrow's murder. Today Miss Marple aimed to decode its secrets and find the vault, hoping to uncover why Victor was so desperate and whether he was the killer. She opened the locket again, examining the tiny note. Its paper was brittle, its ink faded, but a faint watermark caught her eye, a leaf pattern, barely visible, with a grid of lines beneath it. A map? She held it to the light, revealing a sketch of Ashford Manor's grounds, with an X marked beneath the Veritas Flora tree. Her heart quickened. The vault was real, and the locket was its guide. She slipped it into her basket, alongside the coin and the Brazil letters signed L, and set out for the manor, determined to test her theory. The village was bustling, with the aftermath of the fete, its square littered with bunting and apple cores. As Miss Marple passed the bakery, Tommy Pierce darted out, his freckled face alight with news. "Miss Marple, I heard Mr. Redding say he saw that cloaked man again near the manor's back gate. Dropped a bit of string, nodded funny-like." "String? Tommy?" she said, her tone encouraging. "Did you keep it?" He nodded, pulling a short length of twine from his pocket, tied in a series of intricate knots. "Found it by the gate. Looked important." Miss Marple took it, noting its coarse texture and faint tobacco scent. "You're a marvel, Tommy. Run along now." The knots intrigued her sailor's knots, perhaps fitting Victor's time in South America. She tucked the twine into her basket and continued to the manor, her mind turning over the map's implications. At the manor's gates, Clara greeted her, her face drawn. "Miss Marple, you've got the locket, haven't you? Lady Ashford's been asking about it. Says it's hers by right. Has she?" Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "I'd like to see the greenhouse again, Clara, and perhaps Lady Ashford, if she's free." Clara hesitated, then led her through the gardens, where the roses were wilting in the late summer heat. The greenhouse loomed ahead, its padlock gleaming. Inside, the Veritas Flora tree stood unchanged, but Miss Marple's eyes went to the floor beneath it. The map's X marked this spot, and the hidden compartment from Chapter 4 was nearby. She knelt, her fingers tracing the floorboards, and found a faint groove, different from the previous panel. The key Tom had found was too small, but the twines knots sparked an idea. Could they be a code for unlocking the vault? "Clara," she said, "have you ever seen a lock here, or anything unusual?" Clara shook her head, but her eyes flicked to a stone slab under the tree. "Not a lock, ma'am, but that slab's loose. Tom mentioned it once, said it was heavy, like it hid something." Miss Marple's heart quickened. She asked Clara to fetch Tom, who arrived with his rake, his weathered face curious. "Miss Marple, you're at it again. What's this about?" "The slab? Help me move it, Tom," she said. Together they shifted the stone, revealing a rusted iron ring embedded in the floor. It lifted with a groan, exposing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. A ladder led down, its rungs damp with moss. Miss Marple peered in, her knitting needles clicking nervously in her basket. "Tom, have you a lantern?" He fetched one, and its flickering light revealed a small chamber below, lined with shelves of old papers, and a single wooden box, carved with the Ashford crest. Miss Marple climbed down carefully, her basket left above. The box was locked, but the twines. Knots matched a pattern etched on its lid, a sailor's cipher, perhaps. She memorized it and climbed back up, unwilling to disturb the scene without Barnes. "Tom," she said, "we must tell Constable Barnes this is the vault." Tom nodded, his eyes wide. "Never knew it was there, ma'am. Reckon Victor did?" "I suspect so," she said, her mind racing. The vault tied the locket to the bloom and to Harrow's death. She returned to the village, stopping at the library to consult Miss Hartnell, who had helped with the manor's plans. "Miss Hartnell," she said, "have you any records of Ashford family scandals, perhaps from the 1800s? Miss Hartnell's stern face soft with intrigue. "There's an old diary from Lady Ashford's grandmother, Eliza, mentions a betrayal in 1875 of family fortune hidden in a vault guarded by a locket. Eliza's brother stole it, causing a feud that split the family." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The locket's theft in 1905 echoed this earlier betrayal. She thanked Miss Hartnell and headed to the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was hosting a small tea. The guests, Mrs. Price, Mr. Redding, and a new face, Dr. Langley, a retired chemist, were discussing the murder. Dr. Langley, a wiry man with sharp eyes, spoke up. "I knew Harrow, you know. Met him in London at a botanical conference. He was obsessed with Veritas flora, said its petals had medicinal properties, could cure rare ailments. Reckon that's why he came here." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Did he mention a vault, Dr. Langley?" "Not directly," he said, "but he talked of a hidden truth in the Ashford Gardens. Said it was worth a fortune." Miss Marple nodded, the pieces falling into place. The vault held more than papers, perhaps the bloom itself, or its secrets. She visited the police station, showing Barnes the twine and describing the vault. "We must open it," she said, "but carefully. Victor's still out there." Barnes agreed, planning to search the manor that evening. Miss Marple returned to the village square, where a traveling peddler had set up a stall. Among his wares was a small book on sailors' knots, which she bought, confirming the twine's pattern as a code for a combination lock. At home she tested it on a sketch of the vault's box, deciphering a sequence of turns. That evening she joined the sewing circle, where Mrs. Weatherby shared a new rumor. "I heard from the station clerk that the veiled woman was back, asking about Victor. She left a package at the inn, addressed to him." Miss Marple's heart quickened. She visited the Blue Boar Inn, where Mr. Gibbs handed her the package unclaimed with a Brazilian postmark. Inside was a single Veritas leaf, fresh and green, and a note. "The vault is yours, Victor. Don't fail. L." The chapter closed, with the locket's map revealing the vault's location, a satisfying resolution tying it to the century-old betrayal. Yet the veiled woman's package and Victor's coded twine raised new questions. Was he after the Bloom's fortune, or was he protecting a darker secret? Miss Marple knew the vault's contents would hold the next clue, and she was ready to face it. Chapter 10. The Vault Beneath the Tree, The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a delicate flush, painting the village's thatched roofs in hues of rose and gold. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage door, her basket packed with a week's worth of clues: a tobacco-scented scarf, a cigarette case, a brass ring, a knotted twine, a locket with a hidden map, and a Brazilian letter signed L. 9 days had passed since Mr. Harrow, the botanist, was found dead in Willow Lane, clutching a faded Veritas flora leaf that pointed to Ashford Manor's greenhouse. The locket, secured from Clara, revealed a map to a vault beneath the Veritas tree tied to a 1875 betrayal that echoed Victor Ashford's 1905 banishment for stealing the same locket. Victor, the cloaked figure with scarred hands and a limp, was hunting it, his desperation marked by threats and diggings across the village. A veiled woman, possibly L., had sent a fresh Veritas leaf, urging him to find the vault. Today, Miss Marple aimed to open it with Constable Barnes and uncover its secrets, hoping to learn why Harrow died and whether Victor was the killer. She stepped into the morning chill, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path to the vicarage, where Mr. Clement had agreed to join her and Barnes at the manor. The village was stirring, its lanes alive with the clatter of milk carts and the chatter of early risers. As she passed the bakery, Tommy Pierce darted out, his freckled face alight with excitement. "Miss Marple, I saw that cloaked man again near the manor's orchard last night. He was carrying a lantern, like he was looking for something underground." "Miss." Marple's eyes twinkled. "A lantern, Tommy? Did you see anything else?" "He dropped a bit of paper," Tommy said, fishing a crumpled scrap from his pocket. It was a sketch of the Veritas tree with an arrow pointing to its base. "Found it by the orchard gate." Miss Marple took the sketch, noting its precise lines, unlike Victor's hurried notes. "You're a treasure, Tommy. Keep this quiet, dear." The sketch confirmed her suspicions. The vault was the target. She tucked it into her basket and continued to the vicarage, where Mr. Clement was waiting, his cassock slightly rumpled. "Miss Marple," he said, "you've got the whole village on edge. This vault business, do you really think it's tied to the murder?" "I'm certain," she replied, her knitting emerging as they walked. "The locket's map points to it, and Victor's been searching everywhere. We must see what it holds." At Ashford Manor, Constable Barnes was waiting. At the gate, his young face tense. Clara opened the gate, her eyes darting nervously. "Miss Marple, Mr. Clement, Constable Lady Ashford's not here. She's gone to Chipping Cleghorn for the day." "Convenient," Miss Marple murmured, her needles clicking. "Clara, we need to see the greenhouse, the vault beneath the tree, to be precise." Clara paled, but led them through the gardens, where the morning dew sparkled on the roses. The greenhouse door was unlocked unusual, given Lady Ashford's insistence on security. Inside, the Veritas flora tree loomed, its leaves catching the light. Miss Marple knelt by the stone slab she'd found yesterday, its iron ring cold under her fingers. Barnes and Mr. Clement lifted it, revealing the narrow shaft and ladder descending into darkness. Barnes lit a lantern, its glow illuminating the damp stone walls. "I'll go first," he said, climbing down cautiously. Miss Marple followed, her basket left with Mr. Clement, who stood guard above. The chamber was small, its air thick with the scent of earth and mold. Shelves lined the walls, holding dusty ledgers and jars of dried leaves. At the center stood the wooden box from yesterday, its carved lid etched with a knotted pattern matching the twine. Miss Marple produced the twine, her fingers tracing the knots. "A sailor's cipher," she said, aligning the knots with the lid's markings. With a series of careful turns, the lock clicked open. Inside were letters, yellowed and brittle, and a small velvet pouch. The letters, dated 1875, accused an Ashford ancestor, Edward, of hiding a family fortune to cheat his siblings. A later letter, from 1905, accused Victor of stealing the locket to access this fortune, branding him a traitor. The pouch held a single ruby, its facets glinting like blood in the lantern light. Barnes whistled softly. "A ruby? This must be worth a fortune." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, Constable, but it's the letters that matter. They confirm a betrayal and Victor's motive." She read aloud. "The ruby, hidden with a bloom, secures the Ashford legacy. The locket is its key." Mr. Clement, peering down from above, called out, "Miss Marple, there's a footprint here, fresh in the soil. Someone's been in the greenhouse." Miss Marple climbed up, her heart racing. The footprint was large, with a distinctive heel mark, Victor's boots, perhaps. She scanned the greenhouse, noticing a faint scratch on the workbench, as if something heavy had been dragged. "He's been here," she said, "and recently." Back in the village, Miss Marple visited the Blue Boar Inn, where Mr. Gibbs was, polishing glasses. "Mr. Gibbs," she said, "that package from Brazil, did anyone else inquire about it?" "A woman," he said, "yesterday, veiled, with a foreign accent. Asked if Victor had collected it. Seemed anxious when I said no." Miss Marple nodded, the veiled woman's role growing clearer. She headed to the village library, where Miss Hartnell was cataloguing books. "Miss Hartnell," she said, "any records of a ruby in the Ashford family?" Miss Hartnell's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. Eliza Ashford's diary mentions a ruby, part of a set with a locket hidden after the 1875 feud. Said it was cursed, brought ruin to anyone who claimed it." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. The ruby, like the locket, was tied to the vault and to Harrow's death. She visited the vicarage next, where Mrs. Clement was arranging hymnals. "Mrs. Clement," she said, "did Clara's mother ever mention a ruby?" Mrs. Clement frowned. "Mary, she once said Victor gave her something precious, not just the locket. I thought she meant love, but perhaps—" Miss Marple's mind raced. Had Victor given Mary the ruby, too? She returned to the manor, persuading Clara to speak. "Clara," she said, "did your mother ever mention a gem, perhaps a ruby?" Clara's eyes widened. She had a red stone, kept it hidden. Said it was from Victor for her silence. I never saw it after she died." Miss Marple nodded, the puzzle taking shape. The ruby was the second heirloom, and Victor wanted both it and the locket. She visited Constable Barnes, showing him the ruby and letters. "Victor's after the fortune," she said, "but someone else knows. That footprint suggests they're close." Barnes organized a watch on the manor, but Miss Marple headed to the village square, where a traveling fair had arrived. Among the stalls she spotted the veiled woman, her accent unmistakable as she haggled over a trinket. Miss Marple approached, her tone polite. "Excuse me, madam, are you a friend of Victor Ashford?" The woman froze, her veiled face unreadable. "I don't know him," she said, her voice sharp, and hurried away, dropping a small card. Miss Marple picked it up a Brazilian address with the name Louisa, the letters L. The chapter closed with the vault's letters revealing Victor's theft, a satisfying resolution linking the ruby to the betrayal. Yet the fresh footprint in Louisa's presence raised new questions. Was Victor the killer, or was Louisa pulling the strings? Miss Marple knew the ruby held the next clue, and she was ready to follow it. Chapter 11. The Ruby's Keeper. The morning light spilled across St. Mary Mead, gilding the village's cobblestone lanes and casting long shadows from the ancient oaks. Miss Jane Marple sat at her cottage table, her knitting untouched, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the ruby she'd found in the vault beneath Ashford Manor's greenhouse. 10 days had passed since Mr. Harrow, the botanist, was found murdered in Willow Lane, a faded Veritas Flora leaf clutched in his hand, pointing to a hidden truth. The locket, secured from Clara, had revealed a map to the vault, which held letters accusing Victor Ashford of stealing a family fortune in 1905, echoing a 1875 betrayal. The ruby, a second heirloom, was tied to the locket and the rare Veritas. Loom and a fresh footprint near the vault suggested Victor or the veiled woman, Louisa, from Brazil, was closing in. A card with Louisa's name and a Brazilian address hinted at her role, but the ruby's whereabouts before the vault intrigued Miss Marple. Today she aimed to uncover who had held it and why it was worth killing for. She slipped the ruby, locket, knotted twine, and Louisa's card into her basket, alongside the scarf, cigarette case, and ring that marked Victor's trail. The letters from the vault, accusing Victor of theft, suggested he sought the ruby to reclaim his legacy, but Clara's mother, Mary, had once possessed it, according to her cryptic words about a precious gift. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, whose gossip often hid kernels of truth. Her cousin's talk of Victor in Chipping Cleggan, and her own sightings of the cloaked figure made her a likely source of answers. Miss Marple stepped into the village, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. The square was quiet, save for the clatter of a milk cart and the chatter of sparrows. At the shop, Mrs. Price was arranging jars of sweets, her face flushed with the morning's bustle. "Miss Marple," she said, "you're early. More about that dreadful murder?" "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her knitting emerging. "Mrs. Price, you mentioned Victor asking about a locket in Chipping Cleggan. Did he ever speak of a ruby, perhaps one tied to the Ashford family?" Mrs. Price's hands froze, her eyes darting to the shop's back room. "A ruby? Why, that's an odd question. I might have heard something years ago from Clara's mother, Mary. She said Victor gave her a red stone, said it was cursed, brought ruin to the Ashfords." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Did Mary keep it? Do you know?" Mrs. Price hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice low. "She gave it to me, Miss Marple, before she died. Said it was too dangerous to keep. I've had it locked away ever since, didn't want its trouble." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "May I see it, Mrs. Price?" The shopkeeper glanced around, then led her to the back room, where a small safe sat behind a curtain. With trembling hands she opened it, revealing a velvet pouch. Inside was a ruby, identical to the one from the vault, its facets catching the dim light. "I never told anyone," Mrs. Price said, "but Mr. Harrow came asking about it, said he knew it was here. I told him to leave it be, but he wouldn't listen." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. And did you see Victor after that? Mrs. Price nodded, her face pale. 2 nights ago, outside my shop. He was cloaked, limping, said he needed the ruby to set things right. I told him I didn't have it, but he didn't believe me. Left a note under my door next day. She produced a crumpled scrap, its handwriting matching Victor's. Give me the ruby, or you'll pay like Harrow. V. Miss Marple tucked it into her basket, her mind racing. Mrs. Price had the ruby, and Harrow's questions had threatened her secret. Had she acted to protect it? Miss Marple thanked her and headed to the vicarage, where Mr. Clement was pruning. Roses in the garden. Miss Marple, he said, you're tireless. What's this about a ruby now? The Ashford heirloom, she replied, her needles clicking. Mrs. Price held it, given by Clara's mother. Did Mary ever mention why she gave it away? Mr. Clement frowned. She said it was a burden tied to Victor's shame. She wanted it gone, said it brought death to those who kept it. Miss Marple nodded, the ruby's curse gaining weight. She visited the Blue Boar Inn next, where Mr. Gibbs was sweeping the porch. Mr. Gibbs, she said, that veiled woman, did she mention a ruby when she asked about Victor? Not directly, he said, but she said something about a red treasure Victor owed her. Seemed angry when I said he hadn't been. Here. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Louisa. Was she after the ruby, too? She headed to the police station, where Constable Barnes was sorting through evidence. Miss Marple, he said, you've got more clues than I can keep up with. What's this now? She showed him the ruby and Victor's note. Mrs. Price had this, and Harrow knew. I believe he was killed to keep it hidden. We must question her further. Barnes nodded, arranging to visit the shop. Miss Marple returned to the village square, where a traveling bookseller had set up a stall. Among the volumes was a rare text on Veritas Flora, which she bought. It confirmed the ruby's legend. Paired with the locket, it was believed to unlock a fortune hidden by the Ashfords, its petals infused with a rare compound. Harrow's pursuit of this compound had led him to Mrs. Price and to his death. The sewing circle that evening, Mrs. Weatherby shared a new rumor. I heard from the milkman that Mrs. Price was seen arguing with a cloaked man near her shop, night before last. She looked terrified. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. She visited Mrs. Price again, finding her shuttering the shop early. Mrs. Price, she said, Victor threatened you. Did you tell him about the ruby? Mrs. Price's eyes filled with tears. I told him I'd given it to someone else to throw him off. But he knew I was lying. Said he'd come back. Miss Marple patted her arm. You're safe now. But you must tell Constable Barnes everything. Mrs. Price nodded, her voice breaking. I didn't want trouble, Miss Marple. When Harrow came, I was scared he'd tell everyone. I pushed him away, told him to leave. But I didn't kill him, I swear. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp. Mrs. Price's fear was genuine, but her story was incomplete. She returned to the manor, persuading Clara to let her see Lady Ashford's study again. Among the papers was a faded receipt, dated 1905, for a ruby sold to a Brazilian merchant, Louisa's ancestor perhaps. The chapter closed with Mrs. Price revealed as the ruby's keeper, a satisfying resolution tying her to Harrow's murder. Yet her denial and Louisa's role raised new questions. Had Mrs. Price acted alone, or was Victor or Louisa the true killer? Miss Marple knew the ruby's trail would lead her closer, and she was ready to follow. Chapter 12. The cloaked figure's face. The twilight settled over St. Mary Mead like a velvet curtain, softening the village's cobblestone lanes and casting long shadows from the ancient yews. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, her knitting idle, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the distant glow of Ashford Manor. 11 days had passed since Mr. Harrow, the botanist, was found dead in Willow Lane, clutching a faded Veritas flora leaf that pointed to a hidden vault beneath the Manor's greenhouse. The locket, secured from Clara, held a map to this vault, which revealed letters accusing Victor Ashford of stealing a family fortune in 1905, alongside a Ruby II heirloom. Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, had admitted to hiding another. Ruby, given by Clara's mother Mary, and feared Harrow's questions about it. A Brazilian receipt and the veiled woman, Louisa, suggested a transatlantic conspiracy, but Victor's relentless pursuit, marked by a scarf, cigarette case, brass ring, knotted twine, and threatening notes, pointed to him as the cloaked figure. Tonight Miss Marple planned to trap him at the greenhouse, where his desperation for the locket and Ruby was leading him. She slipped the locket, Ruby, and Louisa's card into her basket, alongside the twine and the latest note. "Give me the Ruby, or you'll pay like Harrow. V." The receipt from 1905, linking the Ruby to a Brazilian merchant, hinted at Louisa's motives, but Mrs. Price's fear suggested she knew more about Harrow's death. Miss Marple's plan was simple. Lure Victor to the greenhouse with a rumor that the locket was there, then let Constable Barnes catch him. She stepped into the evening chill, her destination the manor, where she'd arranged to meet Barnes and Mr. Clement. The village was hushed, its lanes empty save for the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. As she passed the bakery, Tommy Pierce emerged, his freckled face pale with excitement. "Miss Marple, I saw that cloaked man by the manor's wall, carrying a shovel." He was muttering about a final chance. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A shovel, Tommy? You're a marvel. Did he drop anything?" Tommy nodded, handing her a small leather pouch, its surface worn. "Found it by the wall. Smells like his pipe." Miss Marple opened it, finding a single Veritas leaf, fresh and green, and a folded note. "The ruby is mine. Meet me at the greenhouse, midnight, L." Her heart quickened. Louisa was in St. Mary Mead, working with Victor or against him. She tucked the pouch into her basket and thanked Tommy, urging him to stay safe. At the manor, Constable Barnes was waiting by the gate, his lantern casting a soft glow. Mr. Clement joined them, his cassock flapping in the breeze. "Miss Marple," Barnes said, "you're sure about this trap? If Victor's as dangerous as you say—" "He's desperate," she replied, her knitting emerging. "Spread the rumor at the inn that the locket's back in the greenhouse. He'll come at—" Barnes nodded, sending a young officer to the Blue Boar Inn to plant the story. Miss Marple led them to the greenhouse, where the Veritas flora tree stood silent, its leaves shimmering in the moonlight. She checked the vault's entrance, still open from yesterday, and noticed fresh scuff marks on the ladder. Someone had been here since her last visit. "He's close," she murmured, her needles clicking softly. They hid behind a row of ferns, the greenhouse's humid air thick with tension. At midnight, a shadow slipped through the door, a tall figure, cloaked, limping, his scarred hands clutching a shovel. Miss Marple's breath caught. Victor. He approached the vault, muttering, "The ruby's here. It must be." Before he could descend, Barnes stepped forward, his voice firm. "Victor Ashford, you're under arrest." Victor spun, his face illuminated by the lantern, older, weathered, but unmistakably the man from the vault's photograph, his eyes wild with panic. "I didn't kill him," he shouted, dropping the shovel. "I only wanted what's mine, the locket, the ruby, the truth." Miss Marple emerged, her voice calm. "Then tell us, Victor, why did Harrow die?" Victor's shoulders slumped, his scarred hands trembling. "Harrow found the vault, knew about the ruby. He was going to tell. The world ruined my chance to reclaim it. I followed him, argued with him, but I didn't strike him. I swear it." Barnes cuffed him, but Miss Marple's eyes were on Victor's coat, where a folded letter protruded. She plucked it out, a note in Lady Ashford's handwriting. "Victor, keep silent or we both lose everything." Her lips pursed. Lady Ashford had been protecting her own secrets, perhaps framing Victor for the theft years ago. They escorted Victor to the police station, where he sat, defeated, in a cell. Miss Marple showed Barnes the letter. "Lady Ashford's involved," she said. "She hid the ruby, framed Victor. But did she kill Harrow?" Barnes frowned. "Victor's our man, Miss Marple. He's been skulking about, threatening folk." "Perhaps," she said, "but this letter suggests another hand." She returned to the village, stopping at the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was preparing tea. "Mrs. Clement," she said, "did Lady Ashford ever mention Victor's banishment?" Mrs. Clement nodded. "She said he stole the locket to hurt her, but I always thought there was more to it. She was too quick to send him away." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell produced a 1905 letter from Lady Ashford's mother, accusing her of orchestrating Victor's banishment to secure the family fortune. The ruby, it seemed, was the key, and Lady Ashford had hidden it, perhaps with Mrs. Price's help. Dot at the village shop. Mrs. Price was closing up, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she said, "I heard they caught Victor. Is it over?" "Not quite," Miss Marple replied. "You kept the ruby for years. Did Lady Ashford ask you to?" Mrs. Price's eyes widened. She told me to hide it, said it was for the family's honor. I didn't know about the murder, I swear." Miss Marple patted her arm, but her mind was sharp. Lady Ashford's letter to Victor suggested complicity, but Mrs. Price's fear hinted at more. She visited the Blue Boar Inn, where Mr. Gibbs confirmed Louisa's presence that morning, asking about Victor's arrest. "She left a note," he said, handing it over. It read, "Victor, you failed. The ruby is lost. L." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Louisa was still in play, but her role was unclear. She returned to the manor, persuading Clara to let her see Lady Ashford's study again. Among the papers was a hidden diary detailing Lady Ashford's plan to frame Victor in 1905, ensuring she inherited the fortune. The ruby, she wrote, was sold to a Brazilian merchant Louisa's family, then reclaimed years later. The chapter closed with Victor's capture and Lady Ashford's role in the theft revealed, a satisfying resolution tying her to the betrayal. Yet her diary and Louisa's note raised new questions. Was Victor innocent of murder, or was Lady Ashford or Louisa the true killer? Miss Marple knew the ruby's curse held the next clue, and she was ready to unravel it. Chapter 13. The Echoes of Betrayal. The morning mist hung over St. Mary Mead like a delicate veil, softening the outlines of its thatched cottages and cobblestone paths. Miss Jane Marple sat at her cottage table, her knitting untouched, her sharp blue eyes tracing the contours of the locket, ruby, and knotted twine before her. 12 days had passed since Mr. Harrow, the botanist, was found murdered in Willow Lane, clutching a faded Veritas Flora leaf that led to Ashford Manor's hidden vault. The locket, secured from Clara, revealed a map to this vault, which held letters accusing Victor Ashford of stealing a family fortune in 1905, a theft orchestrated by Lady Ashford to secure her inheritance. Victor, the cloaked figure with scarred hands and a limp, had been captured last night, denying the murder but admitting his pursuit of the locket and ruby. A diary confirmed Lady Ashford's deception, while Louisa, the veiled woman from Brazil, pushed Victor with cryptic notes. Today, Miss Marple aimed to uncover Louisa's true identity, and whether Lady Ashford's hands were stained with more than deceit. She slipped the locket, ruby, and Louisa's latest note. Victor, you failed. The ruby is lost. L. into her basket, alongside the tobacco-scented scarf, cigarette case, and ring. The Brazilian receipt from 1905 linking the ruby to a merchant suggested Louisa's family had a stake in the Ashford fortune. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the veiled woman's foreign accent and her persistent presence. Was she an ally of Victor's or his manipulator? The answer lay in confronting her, and Miss Marple suspected she'd lingered in the village, stepping. Into the crisp morning, she headed for the Blue Boar Inn, where Louisa had last been seen. The village was waking, its lanes alive with the clatter of market stalls being set up for the weekly fair. As she passed the bakery, Tommy Pierce darted out, his freckled face alight with news. Miss Marple, I saw that veiled lady by the church last night talking to someone in the shadows. She dropped this. He handed her a small brooch, its leaf pattern matching the locket, with a tiny eel etched on the back. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Well done, Tommy. Did you see who she was with? Couldn't tell, he said, but he was tall, wore a cloak. Looked like Victor, but he's locked up, ain't he? Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Victor was in custody, so who was this new figure? She tucked the brooch into her basket and thanked Tommy, urging him to stay cautious. At the inn, Mr. Gibbs was polishing the bar, his ruddy face creased with worry. Miss Marple, he said, you're early. Heard they caught that Ashford fellow. Is it over? Not quite, she replied, her knitting emerging. The veiled woman, Louisa, has she been back? Last night, he said. Asked if Victor got her package. Left when I said he was arrested. Seemed nervous, kept looking out the window. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Did she leave anything else? Mr. Gibbs nodded, producing a folded handkerchief, its corner embroidered with ELA. Dropped this in her hurry. Smelled like jasmine, not tobacco. Miss Marple took it, noting the initials. Louisa Ashford? She headed to the police station, where Constable Barnes was questioning Victor, who sat slumped in his cell, his scarred hands gripping the bars. Miss Marple, Barnes said, he's not talking much, just says he didn't kill Harrow. Miss Marple studied Victor, his weathered face etched with defiance. Victor, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Who is Louisa? She's been sending you notes, urging you to find the ruby. Victor's eyes widened, then dropped. "My daughter," he admitted, his voice hoarse, "born in Brazil after I left. Her mother died young, and I sent money when I could. She came here to help me reclaim the fortune my birthright. Lady Ashford stole it, framed me." Miss Marple's needles paused. "And Harrow? Did Louisa know him?" Victor shook his head. "She arrived after he died. She's no killer, Miss Marple. She only wanted justice." Miss Marple nodded, unconvinced. Louisa's notes were too commanding, her presence too calculated. She showed Barnes the brooch and handkerchief. "Louisa's closer than we thought," she said. "We must find her." Barnes organized a search, focusing on the church where Tommy saw her. Miss Marple headed there, finding Mr. Clement sweeping the porch. "Miss Marple," he said, "you're relentless. What's this about a veiled woman?" "She was seen here last night," she replied, "with a cloaked man. Did you notice anything unusual?" Mr. Clement frowned. "Elsie, our maid, said she saw a woman in a veil by the graveyard, hiding something under a yew tree. I thought it was nonsense." Miss Marple's heart quickened. She searched the graveyard, finding a small tin buried beneath a yew, containing a letter. "Victor, the rubies with the shopkeeper. Get it, or I tell all." Her lips pursed. Louisa knew Mrs. Price had the ruby. Had she threatened her too? She visited Mrs. Price at the shop, where the shelves gleamed with jars of sweets. "Mrs. Price," she said, "Louisa, Victor's daughter, knows about the ruby. Did she contact you?" Mrs. Price's face paled. "Yesterday a woman came, veiled with a foreign accent. Said she'd tell Lady Ashford I had the ruby unless I gave it to her. I said it was gone, but she didn't believe me." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Did she leave anything?" Mrs. Price nodded, producing a small vial, its contents shimmering faintly. "Drop this. Smells like medicine." Miss Marple took it, recognizing the scent Veritas Flora extract, as Dr. Langley had described. Louisa was after the bloom's medicinal properties, not just the ruby. She headed to the manor, persuading Clara to let her see Lady Ashford, who had returned from chipping Cleghorn. In the drawing-room, Lady Ashford sat, her face drawn. "Miss Marple," she said, "you've caused quite a stir. Victor's arrest doesn't end this, does it?" "Not yet," Miss Marple replied. "Louisa, your niece, is here. She knows about the ruby and the locket. Did you know she was Victor's daughter?" Lady Ashford's hands trembled. "I suspected. Victor wrote years ago, mentioning a child in Brazil. I sent money to keep her away. When Harrow came asking about the bloom, I feared she'd return." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "And the ruby?" "You framed Victor to keep it." Lady Ashford's voice cracked. "I had to protect the family. The ruby was my mother's, hidden to secure our future. Victor was reckless, he'd have sold it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Louisa's vial. She visited Dr. Langley, the retired chemist, at his cottage. "Dr. Langley," she said, "this vial, could it be Veritas Flora extract?" He examined it, nodding. "Indeed. Potent, rare, used for heart ailments. Harrow was studying it, said it could revolutionize medicine." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The ruby, locket, and bloom were a triad of fortune and power. She returned to the village square, where the fair was in full swing. Among the crowd, she spotted a veiled figure slipping behind a stall. Miss Marple followed her steps silent, and overheard a whispered conversation. "Victor's caught, Louisa. You must leave." The voice was Mrs. Weatherby's, the postmistress. Miss Marple stepped forward. "Louisa," she said, "we must talk." The veiled woman froze, then lifted her veil, revealing a face like Victor's, but younger, with fierce eyes. "You're the meddler," she said, her accent thick. "I only wanted what father was owed." "And Harrow?" Miss Marple asked. "I didn't kill him," Louisa said. "I came after to find the ruby. Father said Lady Ashford stole his life." The chapter closed with Louisa's identity as Victor's daughter revealed, a satisfying resolution tying her to the conspiracy. Yet Mrs. Weatherby's involvement and Lady Ashford's fear raised new questions. Was Louisa innocent, or had she or Mrs. Weatherby struck the fatal blow? Miss Marple knew the Bloom's extract held the next clue, and she was ready to trace it. Chapter 14. The Bloom's Hidden Truth. The morning sun broke through the mist over St. Mary Mead, casting a soft glow across the village's thatched roofs and winding lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat at her cottage table, her knitting untouched, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the vial of Veritas Flora extract, its faint shimmer catching the light. 13 days had passed since Mr. Harrow, the botanist, was found dead in Willow Lane, clutching a faded Veritas Flora leaf that pointed to a vault beneath Ashford Manor's greenhouse. The locket, secured from Clara, revealed a map to this vault, containing letters accusing Victor Ashford of stealing a family fortune in 1905, a plot orchestrated by Lady Ashford. Victor, the cloaked figure, was in custody, denying the murder but admitting his hunt for the locket and ruby. Louisa, his daughter from Brazil, had emerged as a key player, her notes and a vial of the Bloom's extract suggesting she sought its medicinal value. Mrs. Weatherby's whispered warning to Louisa at the fair hinted at a deeper role, one Miss Marple intended to uncover today. The village postmistress, with her access to secrets, was no mere bystander, and Miss Marple suspected a hidden will tied to the Ashford fortune. She slipped the vial, locket, ruby, and Louisa's brooch into her basket, alongside the tobacco-scented scarf, cigarette case, ring, and knotted twine. The Brazilian receipt and Mrs. Weatherby's involvement suggested a web of debts and betrayals stretching across decades. Miss Marple's plan was to confront Mrs. Weatherby at the post office, then revisit the manor to search for documents that might reveal the fortune's true owner. She stepped into the crisp morning, her sensible shoes tapping a steady rhythm on the cobblestones. The village was alive with the bustle of market day, stalls laden with apples and woolen shawls. As she passed the bakery, Tommy Pierce darted out, his freckled face alight with news. "Miss Marple, I saw Mrs. Weatherby at the post office, talking to that veiled lady again. They were arguing about a letter, and Mrs. Weatherby looked scared." "Miss." Marple's eyes twinkled. "A letter, Tommy? Did you catch anything else?" "She dropped this," he said, handing her a small key, its head engraved with a leaf. "Found it by the post office door." Miss Marple took it, noting its similarity to the key Tom found near the greenhouse. "You're a wonder, Tommy. Stay safe, dear." The key suggested Mrs. Weatherby had access to something hidden, perhaps a post office box tied to the Ashfords. She tucked it into her basket and headed to the post office, where Mrs. Weatherby was sorting letters, her glasses perched precariously on her nose. Mrs. Weatherby. Miss Marple said, her knitting emerging. "You've been seen with Louisa, Victor's daughter. What do you know about her plans?" Mrs. Weatherby's hands froze, her face paling. "Miss Marple, I was only helping a friend. Louisa came to me, said she needed to find her father's legacy. I didn't know about the murder." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "And the letter Tommy saw you arguing over?" Mrs. Weatherby hesitated, then produced a sealed envelope from her apron, its wax seal bearing the Ashford crest. "This came yesterday, addressed to Victor, but Louisa wanted it. I refused. She's too pushy." Miss Marple took the envelope, noting its weight. "May I open it?" Mrs. Weatherby nodded, her eyes darting nervously. Inside was a single sheet, written in an elegant hand. "Victor, the will is in the Manor's library, hidden in the family. Bible, it names you heir. E." Miss Marple's heart quickened. A will naming Victor? The initial E puzzled her possibly. Eliza, Lady Ashford's grandmother, whose diary mentioned the 1875 betrayal. "Mrs. Weatherby," she said, "why help Louisa?" Mrs. Weatherby's voice trembled. "My father owed Victor's family a debt from years ago. He was their gardener, took money to keep quiet about the ruby's sale to Brazil. I thought helping Louisa would settle it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Mrs. Weatherby's motive was clear a family debt, but her fear suggested she knew more. She thanked her and headed to the Manor, where Clara greeted her at the gate, her face drawn. "Miss Marple, lady. Ashford's in the library, but she's been tearing through books all morning. She knows about Victor's arrest." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Take me to her, Clara." In the library, Lady Ashford stood amid scattered books, her silver hair disheveled. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice sharp, "this is a private matter. I'm looking for family records. For a will, perhaps?" Miss Marple said, producing the letter. "This suggests Victor was the rightful heir. Lady Ashford's." Face paled. "That's nonsense. My mother disinherited him after he stole the locket. I've kept the fortune safe." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "By framing him? And what of the rubies sailed to Brazil?" Lady Ashford sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I sold it to protect the estate. Victor was reckless, would have squandered it. I didn't know about Louisa until she wrote, demanding her share." Miss Marple nodded, filing away her admission. She searched the library, finding the family Bible on a high shelf. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a will dated 1904, naming Victor as the sole heir to the Ashford fortune, contingent on possessing the locket and ruby. A note in the margin in Eliza's hand read, "The Bloom's extract is the true wealth." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The Veritas Flora extract, as Dr. Langley had noted, was valuable Harrow's true target. She visited Dr. Langley's cottage, showing him the vial. "Dr. Langley, could this extract be worth killing for?" He nodded, his eyes grave. "Harrow thought so. He said it could cure heart conditions, fetch millions. He planned to patent it." Miss Marple returned to the village, stopping at the Blue Boar Inn, where Mr. Gibbs was serving tea. "Mr. Gibbs," she said, "did Louisa mention the Bloom's extract?" "She asked about Harrow's work," he said, "wanted his notes. Said they were worth more than any jewel." Miss Marple's mind raced. Louisa sought the extract, not just the ruby. She visited the police station, where Victor was pacing his cell. "Victor," she said, "did Louisa know about the will?" He nodded, his voice bitter. "She found out last year, came to help me claim it. But Harrow got in the way, sniffing around the bloom." Miss Marple showed Barnes the will and vial. "The extract is the key," she said. "Harrow died for it. We must find Louisa." That evening at the village fair, Miss Marple spotted Louisa's veil among the crowd. She followed her to a quiet alley, where Louisa was arguing with Mrs. Weatherby. "You promised to get the will." "Louisa hissed Dot." Miss Marple stepped forward. "Louisa, the will is found." "But what of Harrow's murder?" Louisa's eyes flashed. "I didn't touch him. I only wanted father's rights." Mrs. Weatherby fled, but Miss Marple noted her guilt. The chapter closed with Mrs. Weatherby's motive revealed, a debt tying her to Louisa, a satisfying resolution. Yet her fear and Louisa's denial raised new questions. Was Lady Ashford the killer, protecting her fortune? Or was Mrs. Weatherby hiding a darker truth? Miss Marple knew the extract's trail would lead her to the murderer, and she was ready. Chapter 15. The final leaf falls. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its light filtering through the ancient oaks and glinting off the cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting at last set aside, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the array of clues spread before her, the locket with its hidden map, the ruby, the vial of Veritas Flora extract, the knotted twine, the tobacco-scented scarf, the cigarette case, the brass ring, and the will naming Victor Ashford as the rightful heir to the Ashford fortune. 14 days had passed since Mr. Harrow, the botanist, was found dead in Willow Lane, clutching a faded Veritas Flora leaf that pointed to a vault beneath Ashford Manor's greenhouse. The will found in the family Bible confirmed Victor's claim, while Mrs. Weatherby's debt to his family and Louisa's pursuit of the Bloom's medicinal extract revealed a web of betrayal stretching back to 1875. Lady Ashford's role in framing Victor for the 1905 theft was clear, but the murderer's identity remained elusive. Today, Miss Marple resolved to gather the suspects at the manor and unmask the killer, certain the Veritas bloom held the final truth. She slipped the clues into her basket, the vial's shimmer catching her eye. The extract, as Dr. Langley had confirmed, was worth millions for its heart-healing properties, Harrow's true target. Mrs. Weatherby's fear and Louisa's denials suggested neither was the killer, but Lady Ashford's guarded demeanor and control over the fortune pointed to a darker secret. Miss Marple stepped into the village, her sensible shoes tapping a determined rhythm toward the manor, where she'd arranged a meeting with Constable Barnes, Victor, Louisa, Clara, Mrs. Weatherby, and Lady Ashford. The village was quiet, the market, stalls packed away, leaving only the scent of apples and hay in the air. As she passed the bakery, Tommy Pierce ran out, his freckled face alight with excitement. "Miss Marple, I saw Lady Ashford at the greenhouse this morning, carrying a box. Looked heavy, like she was hiding something." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A box, Tommy? You're invaluable. Did she see you?" "Nope," he said, grinning. "I hid behind the roses." Miss Marple patted his shoulder, tucking the detail away. At the manor, Clara opened the gate, her face pale. "Miss Marple, everyone's in the drawing-room. Lady Ashford's furious about Victor being here." "I expected as much," Miss Marple replied, her knitting emerging as she followed Clara inside. The drawing-room was grand, its oak panels gleaming under the chandelier. Lady Ashford stood by the fireplace, her silver hair impeccable, but her eyes cold. Victor, released on bail, sat handcuffed to a chair, his scarred face defiant. Louisa stood beside him, her veil discarded, her fierce eyes meeting Miss Marple's. Mrs. Weatherby fidgeted in a corner, her glasses slipping, while Barnes stood by, the door, his notebook ready. "Miss Marple," Lady Ashford said, her voice sharp, "this is an outrage. Bringing a criminal into my home." "Victor is no criminal," Miss Marple said calmly, settling into a chair. "But a murderer is among us, and we must find them." Her needles clicked softly, setting a rhythm for the room. "Mr. Harrow died because he uncovered the Veritas Flora's secret, a medicinal extract worth millions. The locket, ruby, and will were the keys to a fortune hidden since 1875, stolen by your ancestor Edward, and guarded by your family, Lady Ashford." Lady Ashford's hands clenched. "Preposterous. Victor stole the locket, betrayed us." Miss Marple produced the diary from chapter 12. "Your own words say otherwise. You framed Victor in 1905 to secure the fortune, sold the ruby to Brazil, and hid the truth. But Harrow found the vault, didn't he? He knew about the extract." Victor leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "I told you I didn't kill him. I only wanted my share." Louisa's eyes flashed. "Father's right. I came to help him, not to kill. Harrow was already dead when I arrived." Miss Marple turned to Mrs. Weatherby. "And you, Mrs. Weatherby, helped Louisa because of your father's debt to the Ashfords. But did you know more about Harrow's death?" Mrs. Weatherby's hands trembled. I saw Lady Ashford in Willow Lane that night, near where Harrow was found. She was holding a heavy stick, looked angry. Lady Ashford's face paled. "Lies, I was at home." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Were you? Tommy saw you at the greenhouse today, hiding a box. Shall we look?" She nodded to Barnes, who fetched Clara. They led the group to the greenhouse, where the Veritas Flora tree stood, its leaves shimmering. Miss Marple pointed to a freshly turned patch of soil near the vault's entrance. Barnes dug, uncovering a wooden box, its lid stained with dried blood. Lady Ashford gasped, stepping back. Miss Marple opened the box, revealing a heavy walking stick, its handle bloodied, and a vial of Veritas extract, half empty. "This is the murder weapon," she said, "and the extract you used to keep Harrow quiet, perhaps hoping to poison him first." Lady Ashford's voice trembled. I only meant to scare him. He was going to expose the fortune, ruin us. I followed him to the lane, argued, and I struck him. I didn't mean to kill him." Barnes stepped forward, his voice firm. "Lady Ashford, you're under arrest." Miss Marple turned to Louisa. "And you, Louisa, came for justice, but your notes pushed Victor to act recklessly." Louisa nodded, tears in her eyes. "I only wanted father's name cleared." Miss Marple handed the ruby to Victor. "Your birthright, though tainted. The extract's formula belongs to science now, not the Ashfords." The chapter closed with Lady Ashford's confession, a satisfying resolution, unmasking her as Harrow's killer. The ruby was returned to Victor, and Louisa's role clarified, tying up the conspiracy. The Veritas Flora's extract would be studied, its wealth shared, leaving St. Mary Mead to its quiet rhythms. Miss Marple returned home, Her knitting resumed, content that the final leaf had fallen. Chapter 16. The Whisper of the Leaf. The autumn air carried a crisp bite as Miss Jane Marple stepped off the train at St. Mary Mead's modest station, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. She clutched a small, faded leaf, a brittle sycamore, its edges curling like a secret waiting to unfurl. It was no ordinary leaf. It was the key to unraveling the murder of Colonel Reginald Hargreaves, found dead in his study at Hargreaves Hall 3 weeks prior, a single gunshot wound to his temple, and no weapon in sight. The police had called it suicide. Miss Marple, however, knew better. The leaf had been tucked inside a book on the colonel's desk, a volume of Keats' poetry, open to Ode to Autumn. It was an oddity out of place among the colonel's military memoirs and hunting journals. Miss Marple had pocketed it discreetly during her visit to the hall, invited by the colonel's anxious niece, Clara Hargreaves, who insisted her uncle would never take his own life. Now, as Miss Marple walked the familiar lanes of St. Mary Mead, the leaf seemed to whisper to her, urging her toward truths the police had overlooked. The gathering at the vicarage was ablaze with lamplight that evening, its cozy drawing room packed with an eclectic assembly. Clara had insisted on hosting a gathering to discuss the colonel's death, hoping to shake loose some hidden truth. Miss Marple sat quietly in a corner armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, her eyes darting from face to face. The leaf rested in her handbag, a silent partner in her observations. Clara, pale and earnest, stood by the fireplace, addressing the room. Uncle Reginald was not a man to despair, she said, her voice trembling. He was planning a hunting trip to Scotland next month. Why would he end his life? The guests murmured agreement or skepticism. There was Dr. Haydock, the village physician, who had examined the body and found no signs of struggle. The wound was self-inflicted, he said gruffly, adjusting his glasses. No powder burns on his hands, perhaps, but the angle was consistent. With suicide, Miss Marple's needles paused. No powder burns, she murmured to herself, filing the detail away. Across the room sat Mrs. Lavinia Price, the colonel's housekeeper, her hands twisting a handkerchief. He was troubled, Miss Clara, she said. Ever since that letter arrived from London, he wasn't himself. What letter? Clara asked, her eyes narrowing. Mrs. Price hesitated. It came a week before it happened. Thick. Envelope, fancy seal. He read it, then burned it in the fire. Said it was nothing? Miss Marple's gaze flickered to young Tommy Pierce, the village postman, slouched by the window. Tommy, she said gently, did you deliver that letter? Tommy flushed, scratching his neck. Aye, Miss Marple. From a solicitor in London, it was big red seal, like Mrs. Price says. The room buzzed with curiosity, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. A letter, a leaf, a man who burned his secrets. She glanced at Major Ernest Blake, the colonel's old army comrade, who stood stiffly by the door, his face unreadable. Then there was Lily Harper, the maid, who kept her eyes on the floor, and Mr. Alistair Gray, the colonel's solicitor, who fidgeted with his cufflinks. Each held a piece of the puzzle, Miss Marple was certain, but the leaf was the thread that would tie them together. The sycamore's secret. The next morning, Miss Marple visited the Hargreaves estate, a sprawling manor, surrounded by ancient sycamore trees. The leaf in her possession matched those littering the lawn. but its faded hue suggested it had been plucked long before autumn's chill. She stood beneath the largest tree, its branches heavy with golden leaves, and considered its significance. Why had the colonel kept it? Was it a memento, a clue, or something more sinister? Clara joined her, wrapped in a woolen shawl. "You've been staring at that tree for ages, Miss Marple. Have you found something?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Perhaps, my dear. Tell me, did your uncle ever speak of his time in India?" Clara frowned. "Not much. He served there in the 90s during the Raj. He mentioned a friend, once captain. Something or other who died out there." "Why?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Just a thought. Now let's have a look at that study again." The study was as she'd left it. Dark wood panels, a heavy desk, and shelves lined with books. The Keats volume still lay open, its pages slightly yellowed. Miss Marple ran her fingers along the spine, then paused. A faint indentation marked the page where the leaf had been pressed. She held it up to the light, noticing a barely perceptible watermark, a crest, perhaps, or a symbol. "Clara," she said, "did your uncle have a magnifying glass?" Clara fetched one, and under its lens the watermark revealed itself, a stylized lotus flower encircled by a serpent. Miss Marple's breath caught. She'd seen such a symbol before, in a book on colonial artifacts linked to a secretive society in British India. The Order of the Saffron Veil, it was called, rumored to guard dangerous secrets. The shadow of the past that afternoon, Miss Marple invited Major Blake to tea at her cottage. He arrived promptly, his military bearing softened by unease. She poured tea, her movements deliberate, and set the leaf on the table between them. "Do you recognize this, Major?" she asked. He stiffened. "A leaf, Miss Marple, nothing more." "From a sycamore, yes. But this one was pressed in a book, kept like a treasure, and it bears a mark, a lotus and serpent. You served with Colonel Hargreaves in India. Did you ever hear of the Order of the Saffron Veil?" The Major's cup rattled in its saucer. "That's a ghost story, Miss Marple. A myth, secret societies, and all that nonsense soldiers' tailies to pass the time." "Perhaps," she said, her voice mild. "But myths have a way of leaving traces, like a letter from London burned in haste, or a leaf tucked away for decades." He stood abruptly. "I don't know what you're implying, but I've nothing to hide. Reginald was my friend. His death was a tragedy, nothing more." After he left, Miss Marple sat back, her knitting resumed. The Major's reaction had confirmed her suspicion. The leaf was no mere keepsake. It was a link to a past the Colonel had tried to bury. The solicitor's confession, Mr. Alistair Gray, was next. Miss Marple found him at his office in the village, poring over ledgers. He greeted her nervously, offering a chair. "Mr. Gray," she began, "you sent a letter to Colonel Hargreaves shortly before his death. A thick envelope with a red seal. What was in it?" Gray paled. "How did you—" "It was a routine matter, Miss Marple. A state business." Her eyes held his, steady and unyielding. "I think not. The Colonel burned it, you see. Men don't burn routine letters." Gray slumped, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Very well. It was about his will. He'd asked me to revise it, to include a bequest for a charity in India. Something about a debt he owed from his army days. I advised against it. The charity didn't exist, or so I thought. But he insisted, Miss Marple leaned forward. "And the name of this charity?"